We're eating some pre-free school breakfast birthday bagels. But today we're going to continue our conversation on Charlie Kirk and what it shows about Western civilization. And I'm going to pass it to Doc because he's going to start off our conversation on both Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump, and especially about Western civilization and the remaining question of, can the ruling elite survive? So I'll hand it over to Doc to begin our conversation.
Well, I think you expanded what I was going to talk about.
Oh, okay, we can narrow it.
Yeah.
We can bring it back.
I'm really going to talk about Trump at the UN and
okay.
the Charlie Kirk memorial and where we're at. You know, I'm not going to talk long, I hope. Trump turned the UN General Assembly into a spectacle of him and his apparent defense of white civilization and the rights of white people. He made the claim that the most persecuted religion in the world is Christianity. And he spoke the longest part of his presentation was about immigration and how immigration from the darker nations of the world were destroying white civilization and white nations. That he spoke, I should say, almost an hour when he was allotted 15 minutes.
Whoa.
And so, yes, and it became, again, a spectacle. And he was, I guess, from his point of view, addressing the civilizational crisis of the West. As he stood at the podium of the General Assembly, he looked out and he saw all of these dark nations. The overwhelming majority of the 190 nations in the UN are representatives of Africa, Asia, South America, the Caribbean, and other islands. And so he was like a boss, telling them what he intended to do and what he had done. I think he was making a pitch for the Nobel Prize. The only, I think, representative who supported his claim for the Nobel Prize. By the way, I didn't hear Netanyahu's speech, but I don't think it was Netanyahu. I don't know. He may have made another pitch that Donald Trump deserves a Nobel Prize. But, and this is a bit, maybe not ironical, is the representative of Pakistan, who gave probably the second most vitriolic, warlike speech given before the General Assembly. I don't know about, because I didn't listen to all of them, but he attacked India, and the Indian representative responded, but it was, I thought it was unhinged. And I don't know what this says about Pakistani domestic politics. Maybe Samir has some information on that. But Donald Trump was presenting himself as a warrior for white civilization. And that the conspiracies against white people were coming from the nations represented at the General Assembly. Now, I should say that the U.S. attack upon the General Assembly goes back almost 50 years now. The U.S. was very happy with the General Assembly when, in 1951, I think it was, they got a resolution. What do they call that? What do they call that resolution where they were able to send UN military forces to Korea? Uniting for Peace resolution. But that was 1951. most nations of the world had not achieved political independence, so they were not there. So the US could not get a resolution through the Security Council because Russia, the Soviet Union then, would veto it. So they went to the General Assembly. That General Assembly, I should say, the United States was very happy with. But after 1960 and the accelerating process of decolonialization, the US became increasingly anti the General Assembly. So this thing of Trump standing up there, looking, I mean, it's really a horrible thing, looking in the faces of hundreds of delegates. In fact, it seems that more people, the place was packed, and that was not generally the case for other representatives. It was sparsely attended, but the place was packed and the gallery was full. I think the Trump people organized their people to come there. And he was standing up and saying to the white nations, your commitment to reversing climate change and your position on immigration is destroying your countries. And he was talking about civilizationally. But again, it was a denunciation, really, of the anti-colonial struggle. In some ways, although he doesn't use the language, it was a way of his saying that the only way the UN can go forward is if the majority of nations accept in one or another way a form of neocolonialism or subordination to the United States and the white West. And I'm not speaking hyperbolically. I mean, that was what he was saying. That was the essence of what he was saying. And he was, I'm certain, I didn't see the faces of many people, but he must have been seen as a man out of touch with history and the world as it exists. And it's like saying to Black people, well, you know, you all can do better if you go back to Jim Crow and maybe even consider going back to slavery. That's basically what he was saying. But it's, as I said before, it's part of a decades-long attack upon the General Assembly. And since the General Assembly has become browner, blacker, yellower, the global South, as it is called today, and where the General Assembly has passed resolutions for peace without an effective way to enforce them, but nonetheless against Israel, against different wars, including they have passed a resolution calling for peace in the Ukraine. And these go in the opposite direction to anyone, especially US, a guy like Trump and US policymakers. How dare these countries who came into existence based upon the anti-colonial struggle, and their colonial borders do not reflect who they are, even that is unacceptable to Americans and American policymakers. You know, what Trump cannot, and I say this emphatically, he cannot accept a world that will be decided by the darker races. He must have been mindful of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting only a few weeks before he spoke, and what that represented. He had to have seen the parade in Beijing and all of the heads of state who were on the podium with Xi Jinping. And this is his fight back, so to speak. But again, I would say that for him, it is a defense of a civilization against a rising tide of intercivilizational unity. This question of the unity of civilizations was addressed by countless representatives. But at the end of the day, I would say Trump's presentation and performance should have been seen as a classroom for a lot of governments of the global South, as they call it, who thought that race and the color line and white supremacy were not factors in foreign policy. You know, I can, and I'm including among them, you know, not just India, you know, but China, who thought you could proceed based upon, you know, John Mearsheimer's realism. But Trump invited them to a classroom where he performed white supremacy and civilizational supremacy right before their very eyes. And I know it's not going to happen, but it would be a refreshing thing if some leaders of some of these countries would pick up writers like W.E.B. Du Bois and James Baldwin and study what this issue of white supremacy looks like from the scientific observations of people who lived it. You know, this is very important, this idea that the game of international politics is a game of great power negotiations. I hope at some point they understand that it's deeper than that, it's more than that. That the people that you are negotiating with from the West never saw you and do not see you now as their equal. And Trump said it without blushing. This idea that the world can be seen separate and apart from the color line is expressed prolifically on many of the podcasts that are considered left. For example, Danny Haiphong, his podcast, Norman Finkelstein, who was all over the place, Douglas McGregor, who was a conservative who wants America to be returned to its white, glorious past, and that Trump is messing that up. Judge Napolitano and Alexander Mercurius, just to name a few of the more prominent podcasters from the so-called anti-war left perspective. Most of the guests on these podcasts are white, not just most, but overwhelmingly. It gets exhausting after a point. It is a white discussion about a world that is not white. I'd like to repeat that. A white discussion and narrative about a world that is not white. And even though, for example, the Danny Haiphongs or the Norman Finkelsteins, or even for that matter, many of the Black podcasters, for example, Garland Nixon, you know, he's going into this geostrategic stuff, and they act, again, I want to say this again, that you can talk about a non-white world by only having white people talk about it. The reason I'm sensitive to it, and maybe a little more sensitive than you guys are, because I've lived it, I still live it. The arrogance of the liberal, the left, the social democrat that knows more than anyone else. And who better to explain the world than white people? So I would say there's not that much of a separation between some of these people and Donald Trump. Sometimes you get a feeling that it's only about the details and not about the essence of matters. We differ on this or the other policy, but what about the essence of policy? What does this policy emerge from? For leftists, they would say, well, this is imperialism, this is neoconservatism, and what do you expect? From our standpoint, we would say, yes, that is, but then there is a deeper significance, and that is the civilizational question and such. But then, this UN spectacle by Trump was followed a couple of days. Well, it was preceded a couple of days by the memorial for Charlie Kirk. I think we should be very clear about Charlie Kirk was a white supremacist. And so, I mean, I don't think he would argue with it. Maybe he wouldn't like the language, but he's, when he says America first, they're talking about white people first. And the claim that Charlie Kirk made over and over again, that Black progress was based upon taking away the rights of white people. And again, having witnessed the bitter and long struggles for civil rights, let's just underline this. Yeah. For the right to vote, for the right to due process of the law, meaning protection of the law, protection from open terrorism in the South. So much so that most Black people who are from the South were afraid to return sometimes because it was just that harrowing. The memorial for Charlie Kirk suddenly reframed him and rebranded him as a Christian evangelist, that he was preaching Christianity to young people on college campuses. Now, I just like to make an observation. When they talk about Charlie Kirk having been responsible for all of these college youth voting for Donald Trump, I think he may have been partially responsible. How many, we don't know. But I think if you're going to talk about students, I think the greatest event that pushed them away from Biden and Kamala Harris were the student encampments. This was one of the great events in the history of student movements in this country. It made the youth and students aware of the U.S.'s financing and participation in a genocide, and they could not vote for Kamala Harris. It was a vote against Kamala Harris and the genocide and the Zionist relationship. But I think to present Charlie Kirk as a Christian evangelist raises the question of Christianity. And as you know, I listen or read David Brooks and Ross Duvat. I know I'm mispronouncing it. I kind of pronounce it the way it appears. And But Ross Douthat and David Brooks have been talking a great deal about Christianity, and the nation is without a moral compass because the nation has turned its back on Christianity. Now, we have taken note over the last couple of years of what is going on with the mainstream denominations, mainline denominations, which include the Episcopalians, the Methodists, even the Southern Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Unitarians, that the people have walked away from these churches. Into this void has come evangelicals. They've been around now in some force for maybe 50 years. I mean, probably longer. But as the Southern Baptists, which is the white Baptists, declined, the evangelicals came in and, in a certain sense, became a form of Christian populism, but then also a form of white nationalism. But what is so apparent in that almost 100, I heard one commentator say that there were 300,000 people. It didn't look like that as I looked at the photos or the videos of the stadium. They said there were a lot of people outside, however. But what they were praying to and what they were celebrating were white gods. We have been absolutely right in our sociology of saying that the gods of most white people and the gods of almost every Black person are not the same. I think what stood out to me most, besides Tucker Carlson saying in effect that that he believes that Israel was involved in the killing of Charlie Kirk, and maybe Charlie Kirk's wife saying that she forgives a guy that killed him. And they're going in two different directions here. She's assuming that the guy that they charged with the killing is the guy that did the killing. Tucker Carlson is saying that he doesn't believe the guy charged with the killing actually did it. So to Charlie Kirk's widow, who are you forgiving? This is a big question. But nonetheless, she expressed Christian compassion. Where this goes, we don't know. But Charlie Kirk and that memorial for him was a manifestation of the crisis of whiteness. When you read David Brooks and Ross Douthat, they express the same thing. And I'm saying they don't say it like this. But once you deconstruct their logic and their language and get a sense of what they aspire to or what they want to change or what they want to create, it is very clear that all of them, the Charlie Kirk Memorial, Douthat, and Brooks, these very sophisticated public intellectuals are making a similar claim. That white people are disunited because we don't have religion, we don't have a moral compass. But at the end of the day, it represents a crisis of whiteness. By crisis of whiteness, I'm saying a crisis that is so severe that rather than uniting white people, except they're being separated more. It is a crisis of whiteness. We have here in the free school talked about or tried to put numbers on the various parts of the white population, which are very difficult to understand sociologically. Our methods, our sociological methods, we don't have the methods to deal with a people who are so fragmented and so predisposed to the individual person that you can't get a handle on them. See, sociology in the main is about the study of groups and the behavior of groups. They could be as big as a society or small as a neighborhood group. But that's what sociology does. What do you do and how do you understand this group of people who, and I agree with Brooks in that, who have no moral anchorage, are leaderless, and more than not defer to the individual and would prefer in a crisis isolation from rather than participation in. It is very different. I know from the standpoint of the sociology of Black people, Black folk, even if we fail, have a predisposition in crisis to seek group solutions or group activity. And I think that's one of the things that we're finding out in our study here in Philadelphia. I mean, it's so apparent that Lucian Blackwell, that there's always, I mean, you don't even have to say it. It's like a, normal that we have to come together. And what our weakness is that we're not coming together strongly enough. It's not that I should abandon everything and go my own way into my own desert and pout and commiserate until I find a solution, like going and blowing 100 people away because I'm mad at the world. Y'all did this to me. That is not the Black way. So we do have two groups. Now, the other thing that we talk about here, and I think this has been very important, and I think the Charlie Kirk memorial and the way they're trying to rebrand him and everything helps us to understand this possibility of part of the white community, which I think already exists, aligning with and seeing and recognizing the leadership of Black folk. When I say leadership, I'm not saying Black people come among whites and y'all do this or y'all do. No, I'm not saying that. But the historic role, and so they would have a higher probability of going against a mass, let us say, which is predisposed to white supremacy and all that means. Even if they don't espouse white supremacist ideas, assumptions of white supremacy. So we've talked about 20% of the white population, which is not insignificant. And given a highly mobilized or united Black community, it could be the force that changes a country. Just, a small thing on this. What demobilizes or attempts to demobilize Black people is the Democratic Party. And because of the Black misleadership role in the Democratic Party, it makes the Democratic Party look like it's pro-Black pro Martin Luther King. Now, most Black people don't accept this anymore. And you know that, by the way, that they don't vote. If you don't mind, I'd like to just, the other thing is, remember we talked, I think it was in the end of 2022, when Richard Haas.
Yes. I've been thinking about this.
Yeah, that the greatest threat to American security is not Russia, China, or North Korea, but the American people.
Right.
Which was his way of saying something we have said here, that the American people are or can become a geostrategic force in the world. If, for example, all sides, and this is what is very interesting, of the American people are anti-war or anti-intervention.
Yeah.
Now, Trump tries to navigate around this or act like it doesn't exist, and that they voted for him because he is such a great figure in history. Well, homeboy, that's not why they voted for you. Some did, but most didn't. Vote for you because you're so charismatic and articulate. I guess this is the wake-up call for him. One, you're not cute.
Not at all.
Yeah, no, I mean, matter of fact, you don't look that good. I mean, you're hideous looking, by the way. I mean, I put it this way, he hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
He hasn't aged well. I mean, and all that makeup can't cover up that you ain't all that. That's number one. Number two, you ain't that good of a speaker. Don't nobody understand what you're talking about. Number three, you ain't an intellectual. Now, all of these, it must take a lot of energy for this cat to get up every day and tell himself that I'm the cutest, I got the finest wife. Oh.
Every day.
You should have seen, and the first lady, she had to walk up the steps because the escalator broke. Oh, tragic. And me and the first lady are in good, if we weren't in good shape. You in good shape, dog. Have you checked out your ankles swollen all up? You limping and halfway crippled and shit. But no, we ain't good. See, I'm saying this is a cat. I didn't want to go here, but when a cat has that much delusional shit about himself, he has to perform or tell himself every day how great he is in order for him to put on that performance. In the realm of acting, they call it method acting. Have you ever heard of method acting?
Yes.
Where you literally become the character that you're portraying on the stage. And that's what I see in Trump, and he solved 7 wars around the world, and the people that's involved in them will say, well, we still fighting. We didn't stop it. But anyway, that the U.S. economy is the hottest economy in the world since I've been in office for 8 months. But it works to a certain extent because he exudes confidence even though it's delusional, but he showed, and so a lot of people say, well, he can't be lying all the time. He must be telling the truth half of the time. Well, it's all a fraud. It's all a perpetration. But I think it was very interesting that Emily, when you presented on Diane Nash and Coretta Scott King as representatives of civilization, I would hope that who's in the you in the Black Gods group?
Yeah, a bunch of us.
Yeah. See, we're talking about civilization.
Mhm.
You know, now, Foster got it wrong. He used the word cult, but that was 1940s. He didn't have the language, you know. But it is the language that Du Bois gives us, a civilization and potentiality.
Yeah.
So these representatives of civilization, and I would say of the future, and I think from what I understand about the way you all are talking this out, that you are looking futuristically.
Mm.
And I think the comparison of the Charlie Kirk Memorial and the Donald Trump spectacle at the UN is a good way for us to say this is one civilization
Mhm.
that has some time ago cast aside all of the valuable things that it brought into the world and has now become a shadow of itself.
Yeah.
And here is a living civilization
Right.
reflected. Of course, you could take individuals like Coretta, like Diane Nash, of course, Martin Luther King, but then you can take the Black Gods. And I know for many people, you know, I guess hard leftists, they would say, well, why are you retreating to religion? Well, I don't think they understand either religion or Black Gods, you know? And by the way, the study of Black Gods is a real sociological study. It's part of what sociology does. And then, of course, Charlie Kirk as a representative of a white and dying civilization. This is all I want to say to end. I think, by the way, I was neither threatened nor impressed with the Charlie Kirk Memorial. A lot of people were frightened by it. You know, I don't think we would be at all because, you know, we kind of got a handle on it. It is what it is. It is what we know it is. I saw it as pathetic, really. I thought the music was pathetic. I thought the speeches, of course, this guy, Stephen Miller, this cold-blooded Zionist, he got up there and said, it literally called for revenge.
Yeah.
Shooting war. We're going to get revenge. You killed our man. We're going to kill some of y'all. You know, of course, that would be catastrophic for this country and for white people. I was talking to a friend whom I saw in Reading Terminal, whom I hadn't seen for some time. I won't mention his name here. If you ask me afterwards, I'll tell you. But we happened to meet in Reading Terminal and, you know, exchanged pleasantries. And then he called me. He had canceled me because of the 2024 election. And he has something to do with WURD and that lazy narrative. And so, you know, he asked me certain questions. You know, he's a journalistic cat. And I said to him in no uncertain terms, because, you know, I feel a certain way. Why you cancel me, dog? We've known each other for 40, 50 years. You canceled me without even, you know, asking me anything. You know, so I said, yeah. I said, I thought you proclaimed yourself to have been a revolutionary at one time. You know, a revolutionary does not bow down to any side of the ruling elite. You know, and in any transition is going to be ugly. The Trump election, and by the way, we cannot forget that this was a ruthless defeat for one side of the ruling class, the dominant side. Here is a guy who barely won in 2016,
Right.
who did not win with all the claims that he made that the election was stolen. And there's reason to think so. I mean, you can't rule it out. And then during the 4 years between 2020 and 2024, he was indicted, I don't know how many times.
42.
How many times?
42.
42 times. Oh my God. In different states and localities for all kinds of things. There were efforts to bankrupt him. I don't know how much money he has. And in Georgia, they even mugshot him.
Right.
All of this humiliating stuff. The FBI raided his complex in Mar-a-Lago. Yeah, that's one place I never want to go. It's every picture I've seen. It looks like one of those houses of horror where Bela Lugosi or Frankenstein lived. It's just that gaudy and ugly. I mean, God damn, could you lift up the blinds so some sunlight could come in and all them drapes and shit? But anyway, so my friend, so I told him, I said, look, man, this is a transition. Did you think it was going to be pretty? It is going to be ugly, and there's no guarantee of success. It was and then it could get uglier.
Yes.
So, I mean, you canceling me, what's that about? I said, we need to broaden the discussion. I said, look, man, I voted for Trump. Why don't you ask me why? And since you on the radio, why didn't you invite me on there? I'm not hiding from nobody, and I'm not running a popularity contest. This is where I'm talking to him. Now we on the phone. So I could tell, he was feeling, like, wow, this cat might come through the phone and punch me in the mouth. But I told him in no uncertain terms that in the wider discourse, the people deserve more than what you all are presenting to me. Then I told him I said, I deserve more respect than you people are trying to give me. He said, well, who would you say we should talk? I said, you should talk to me. We do this every week in Free School. We study this. We are not afraid of the future. We fight for the future. And so for them, Trump is a fascist, and that we are waging a modern day version of an anti-fascist struggle. Of which I told him, I said, well, I don't know why you have to go to the European examples of Germany and Italy. I mean, what we have going on here, if you want to talk about fascism, what did you call Jim Crow? I mean, we could just call it Jim Crow. Or as Michelle Alexander in her very famous book, The New Jim Crow, talking about imprisonment. I mean, are these prisons not concentration camps? Has this not been an all-out assault upon the Black community by targeting Black men? The criminalization of a whole race of people? By the way, I wrote an essay on that. The criminalization of Black people in the face of racism. Matter of fact, this was in the late 80s. Already you saw criminalizing of an entire people. Well, that wasn't fascism because your liberal sponsors didn't say you could use that language.
In what journal?
Political Affairs.
Okay.
But you see where I'm coming from. The hypocrisy of the whole affair. So, I don't know how much ground I made in talking to him. He asked me about Black youth. I said, that is a question and a problem right now. I said, when 100 white campuses carried out occupations, not one Black university, not one. The only time the possibility of a protest arose was when Biden came to speak at Morehouse graduation.
Right.
And Eddie Glaude, the quote, famous Eddie Glaude, unquote, of Princeton University, and a graduate also of Morehouse, went down there and undermined that. But if it were not so much uncertainty and cowardice among Black students, he could not have done it. Or you take what Black studies or Africana studies has become, which has ideologically undermined the whole project of African American studies, turned it into a study of Africa, so-called Africana studies. There's something diversionary and distractive about that, the very language. At Temple, they call it now the Department of Africology, which is, well, I won't get into the detail, but this prevents Black students at white universities from fulfilling their responsibility to humanity. The very fact that imagine this, 19% of all of the students at historically Black colleges and universities are Black men. 19%. The university that I graduated from began as a place to educate ministers and teachers. And it was a Black male college. As I've told you all before, when our university fully integrated in terms of gender, we were all happy. Our sisters, we're gonna be down together, that kind of feeling that we had. But now at Lincoln, less than 30% of the students are Black men. It confirms a kind of a long death march that Black men are on. So all the talk about fascism, is hollow. I mean, what are you talking about? Donald Trump attacks Columbia University. That's fascism. But what about Bill Clinton? The crime and anti-terrorism bill ended up 30% of young Black men in prison. Oh, but that wasn't fascism. You see the double standard. So we're a Black youth, we are yet to determine where they are. I know that Black men are in a bad situation. Not all, but the poor and working class. Their mothers and families fear for their lives regularly. There are families that move outside of cities so they can protect their sons. But somehow that doesn't factor into the discussion. I'll end here that I think our emphasis on the civilization, the clash, I don't want to sound like, what's his name? Huntington, yeah. A clash of civilizations. But we do have the example of two civilizations in this country. One rooted in white supremacy, the other's anti-white supremacy. The white masses now will have to make a choice. Social democrats and liberals don't help them or give them leadership in making this choice. The anti-Trump movement, for the most part, is a reflection of the struggle over state power before state power by two wings of elites that cannot answer any of the questions before the people. Just in terms of our the panel, the group on deindustrialization, we have to study the deindustrialization of Philadelphia, but we have to come forward with a proposal to reindustrialize, which has to take account of this technology, what they call a fourth industrial revolution. It will not be the old form of reindustrialization. And I'll stop there.
I just wanted to say about the Charlie Kirk thing, and I guess this is a repeat of what I said last time, but it's related to what you were talking about civilizationally. I didn't realize, but because I was talking to a couple people in preschool, about Israel being complicit in Charlie Kirk's death, but one of the people who influenced me early politically, but not someone who I sought to look after, was David Horowitz, who was the former editor of Rampart magazine, but then he later on in life he became a neocon, and he would start
And the Zionist.
and a Zionist. Not, I feel like I had to clarify. But he was influential in getting Charlie Kirk and Stephen Miller to get together. He was a mentor. He was a mentor apparently to both of them. He founded the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and he was the person who gave the money to TPUSA. But he was part of this early struggle, in the Obama years, to say that university professors are radicalizing, are leftist radicals, and they need to be purged from universities because they're anti-American. And this was a far-right point of view, all from like 2008 to before the Trump, and he got absorbed into the Trump movement. And there's other people like him, like Brigitte Gabriel or whatever her name is, the Lebanese woman. You probably don't know her. But these are far-right influencer types. But his point of, I just think it's interesting they started off as a leftist. And the fundamental assumptions of his worldview are openly white supremacist. And obviously we're opposed to this. But there are also leftists who are looking at the current situation, like the Duran. They were very upset with the Charlie Kirk thing, and I think it's for unique reasons. But it's because they are losing optimism because white civilization is in crisis, and it's not just that the economic crisis and the state crisis has expanded into a metaphysical crisis.
The question I asked, what do we stand upon? What do we stand for? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I mean, you're right, and it's the whole thing has been a lie, because then they'll say, "Oh, we go back to Greek and Roman." But that's
or Judeo-Christian.
Or that's the language that David Horowitz, and these people were saying that Obama is a secret Muslim, and that he's from Kenya. He's actually African. And when I was doing door knocking in 2016, I ran into these people, and they're afraid. I only ran into one couple, and he's just like, what can you say? How can you argue with this point of view? I had something wrong to say about the Israel being involved in the shooter, but I really don't think so. I think the shooter's, confession is, some hate can't be negotiated. I understand. It's not that I'm saying I support violence or that I think that violence is the right path, but I understand. He said that it can't be negotiated, and he's right. You can't negotiate. with that. And, political violence is the only violence that makes sense. Lover on lover violence, that doesn't make sense. Why would you shoot someone you love? Someone you get into a dispute. Why would you shoot your neighbor? Obviously you lost your temper. But this sort of like the man who entered Pelosi's house and hit Pelosi's husband with a hammer and said, "Oh, I just wanted to break his knees because I just wanted to send a message to all these other politicians." That makes sense to me. Political violence is the only violence that makes sense, and it's endemic to the white civilization. I've been thinking a lot about Malcolm X and what he said about the white liberal and the white conservative, one being the fox and one being the wolf. Just one is more sly in the way that he gets you. But I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, I think the phrase that came to mind also was you were speaking, Doc, was the one that we've said a lot, which is that the center cannot hold.
Yes.
And I think that applies. It's not just about the political center in the United States and this increasingly vicious struggle between these different elite factions, but it's also even within like the MAGA coalition, like you see this. Always they're attempting to be like, we're united, but it's like always there's this like tearing apart. And I don't even think the MAGA coalition, I mean, like post-Trump, I don't think there is a future for MAGA, to be honest. And I think that's increasingly clear because of also just like how like weak people like JD Vance are, like how unimpressive they are. And they don't even have the charisma that Trump has, which is part of what holds the MAGA coalition together. But I think, so there's that. And then I think what was interesting to me about watching the UN speech and Trump's speech was actually, to me, it was almost like, I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but to me, it was almost like you could see like 3 different visions of the world order present. One of which is I locate with like the new president of the UN General Assembly, whose name is Annalena Baerbock
From Germany.
From Germany, who
The Green Party.
Green Party used to be the foreign minister. So she really embodies kind of what they call the pro-NATO Atlanticist.
Yes.
The kind of neoliberal, like, because Green Party is supposed to be progressive, but they're all really like neocon at the same time. So I feel like Baerbock represents that kind of neoliberal, globalist, like institutional thing, which is basically the thing which Trump emerged out of the darkness to like basically tear your face off. And then you have Trump, who represents, like the splitting of like white civilization and the crisis of white civilization. And so in that sense, like even between, because like it was Baerbock's opened the session, and then she was like, the world leaders have 15 minutes to talk. Everyone knows that we have 15 minutes to talk. And then Trump shows up and he like shits on the UN for a whole hour. And I was like working while it was happening. I was like listening to it, like, whoa. I was like, he's like not holding back at all. And so like to me, I see it as like partially a split in that like that vision of the world led by white civilization. And the third world is, I mean, not like the literal third world, although I guess you could call it that, but it is the darker nations. And it's like, like all of these, whether they're perfect leaders or not, but it's people like, I really like Gustavo Petro's speech from Colombia. I know that others have shared like the Indonesian president's speech. And that's the part which in some ways is, you can interpret it as driving, part of what's driving even the crisis of the white world is like you said, looking out the sea of faces, and they're all darker faces. And yeah, I don't know. I really like Petro's speech because one, he was saying like, I mean, he was denouncing Trump because Trump has been, bombing like boats on Venezuela's coast and saying that they're drug dealers and stuff, but no one can verify that, so it just looks like terrorism basically. And but more than that, actually, what Petro called for was basically, I think it may be through the Uniting for Peace resolution, but basically saying that there needs to be like an actual army to liberate Palestine. And I don't know how feasible that is, but the thing, like, that was the kind of more visible or remarkable thing he said. But actually, what I liked about his speech was he was saying that in a way that felt very reminiscent of Castro. Like, he was saying there is a new political subject in the world, and that political subject is humanity. And that even beyond nation states, that this new subject of humankind has to make itself known, and that any vision for what we call democracy has to place humanity, like actual world humanity, at the center of its vision. And it's like, actually, Petro, I think just today, like a few hours ago, he had his visa revoked by Trump, by the Trump administration.
They kicked him out.
Yeah, because apparently Petro afterwards he went to a protest, like a Palestine protest, and he was like, U.S. soldiers should disobey orders from Trump.
Yeah.
Apparently. And so I don't know. Like, to me, I saw it as like three visions. I like three visions of the world, because like I really do think that, like, because part of the critique that comes from the darker nations is like, why doesn't the UN do anything? They're like, we talk all the time, but we can't do anything about all this. And like this, if this institution is supposed to mean something, it should be literally there to prevent a genocide. That should be like at a basic level what an institution like the UN should be for. Like, that was the whole reason why it was created. And so I think in that way, like, that's part of the, like, I see it, yeah, like part of like the evolving situation. But yeah, I think the other, because when you brought up with like the Charlie Kirk Memorial, I do think that, like, one, like, it's not like, yeah, you're right, it's not so much fear, it's just like disgust at large parts of
like
it.
that. Yeah.
And like, because I listened to Stephen Miller's speech, and like, I think that guy is like legit evil. Like, he's like legitimately like a Netanyahu style,
Absolutely.
like, political figure. And he, like, you can tell that he's like almost like salivating at the chance of like something like Charlie Kirk's assassination to happen, so that he can do, like, he can try to push through his agenda. But like the way that he talks is exactly the way that Netanyahu talks, which makes sense because he was, yeah, like you're saying, he was a mentee of Horowitz, but he's like, we are the forces of light and they are the forces of darkness. We built civilization, they built nothing. And, you know, you can interpret that to the Democrats, but he's talking about, like, not just the Democratic Party, but like, yeah, like the darker world.
That's what he was talking about.
Yeah, and I think that, like, there is that kind of moral rot, which is there. And I think in some ways that's like kind of pushed its face forward, as like also like the Trump like coalition has not been able to like actually crystallize around anything positive. But I think at the same time, yeah, the kind of, I guess what we call the farce, I guess, of like American evangelical Christianity, which actually, like, in some ways I empathize with, because yeah, like I grew up around those people, but it's like, the sad thing is that, at least from those kinds of people, like, there is something sad about it, where it's like, yeah, like, you really want something, like, you want something to give your life meaning, and you want to feel like you have a purpose, and it's like, you feel like you can only turn to like this.
Yeah.
And at least for like those most visible parts of like, yeah, the kind of evangelical movement. And actually reminded me of there's like a chapter we read in the Black Gods in the Metropolis book this week, where Fawcett is asking, like, why do these so-called cults, why do these new religious movements attract Black people coming from the South to the urban North? And part of it is that he's like, these Black people, it's like they're dissatisfied with even mainstream Black religion. And it's like, he's like, they're searching for new experiences that allow them to even psychologically deal with this like new form of white supremacy that you have to deal with coming up into the North. And but even more than that, it's like not just that, but it's also like, like he actually creates he creates a metaphor, which is, it's almost like they're searching to go from undergraduate school to graduate school in terms of their search for truth and their search for redemption and their search for salvation. And it's like, I mean, you say this before, but like, it is like a lot of white people are stuck in the basically kind of kindergarten.
Yeah.
They haven't even gone to college yet.
They really, they haven't even gotten to elementary school.
Yeah. And so I do think that is, and like that is part of like the challenge of dealing with this whole country, like in its totality. And I agree with what you said of like, there's as much as there's even a challenge for us of like how do we do sociology with Black people in Philadelphia, even beyond that, like how would you do a sociology with white people in this country? I'm not sure. And I think that's like, I think it's an important.
Well, one of the indicators of what you're saying is that there's not much sociology of white people.
Yeah.
You know, I think the most significant work was Bowling Alone. That where they showed white people retreat, or a large part of white people retreating into the individual, bowling alone, not in a bowling club or bowling anything, you know. But
Yeah, actually, building on what you presented, Doc, and then Samir and Jeremiah, I feel like there's something very helpful about like the re-emphasis of civilization.
yes,
Because I think,
can I just say, and what Jerry said, which kind of, it's us too. I mean, some of those speeches sound like the free school, the centrality of humanity, the all humanity movement. This is absolutely right. And to realign the American people with the world's people, it has to take on an all humanity character,
right.
you know, and of course, as you say, so, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's right, because actually the connector, what Jeremiah emphasized and what you said of, there's something about like putting those two together, Trump's speech at the UN plus Charlie Kirk memorial, that actually it's the fact that there's increasingly a rise of like Trump with the darker faces of the world, where Trump in some ways, he's both going against that NATO transatlantic German Green Party, but he cannot confront or reconcile with the direction of humanity. And because there's something, and it's white supremacy. He's like, oh, maybe I should retreat back into defending what was, without realizing what was no longer can be. But actually that is in return fueling a deeper and deeper crisis of white civilization in America. Because actually it was really helpful hearing your thoughts on the Charlie Kirk memorial, because the fact that the MAGA movement, the so-called MAGA movement, of all these different podcasters, intellectuals, political cabinet leaders, Trump himself, they all gathered for this memorial, but none of them even seem to know Charlie Kirk. They all have different descriptions of his truth. Even what they're claiming to celebrate him for was not even Charlie Kirk, really, right? There's that. But they all feel this need to celebrate him as a martyr, almost as a sort of saving grace. And actually, it's kind of interesting because, like you said, Tucker Carlson's assessment is even completely different than the widow of Charlie Kirk. And it just shows you, but what they have in some ways, what I think Tucker Carlson and even Candace Owens unfortunately have in common is the reason why they need to make Charlie Kirk a martyr, even though I honestly don't think Charlie Kirk ever was that strong of a political force in the country.
Interesting.
Honestly, because I'm also skeptical of, I think his base really was a very specific white college student base. I'm not even convinced that Charlie Kirk appealed to the white blue-collar young people who never went to college. I'm not convinced about that, actually. I have not heard one of my members talk about Charlie Kirk. They do talk about Trump. They really like Trump. I've never heard them talk about Charlie Kirk. So I'm not convinced that Charlie Kirk was was a political force in the way that Trump clearly was, or Tucker Carlson is. And so the fact that everyone suddenly is coming around Charlie Kirk after his assassination to make him a martyr like this, I think part of it is because they thought that maybe he could be used as a way to unify and revive, and actually more than even just darker humanity, they're trying to also create this imaginary evil or enemy of the left, a left that's flopping around. It doesn't even have that much. The left, the so-called left, the liberals, whatever, this boogeyman that they're trying to make into a boogeyman of like, we need to unite around against them. That boogeyman doesn't even exist because the left themselves is not even strong enough to survive. I mean, they just lost the election. So it's, I feel like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, part of it is that they do not want to confront they themselves don't even want to confront the fact that there's something existential, an existential collapse of white civilization. And even I think, for example, Tucker Carlson, even him trying to blame Charlie Kirk's death on Israel, I actually find it to be interesting because I'm like, first of all, it's a way to deny that a product of your own worldview, a product of your own civilization is part of your own demise. Why do you not want to confront this existential crisis of white folk that you yourself will be dragged down by? Instead, you'd rather make a boogeyman. And then the second thing is, if you're going to blame it on Israel, then why not also go all the way and say Israel killing Charlie Kirk is also our own doing, because Israel is just an extension of Israel is a creation of white America. Israel is a creation of, so I think it was really helpful to kind of clarify some of this and how I think what we're seeing is an increasing decline and collapse of white civilization, and the people, various intellectuals who are all not the same, they're all very different, cannot deal with it. And the reason why they can't deal with this is because they are not able to go towards a future civilization that is not white. They're not prepared. And actually it was helpful even, I just want to emphasize like this thing of, Doc, you talking to your friend about this transition phase, because I was like, honestly, the way I see free school right now, the past few weeks, and I think some of our struggles of trying to understand Charlie Kirk, where blah, 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 all the stuff, Trump, the changes in Trump, is I feel like we're constantly asking the two questions of, one, what is the stage of history we're at? Right. But also, what is the history of, where in the history of consciousness are we? The consciousness of Black folk, the consciousness of white folk. Can you even lump white folk together? Are they unable to even be lumped as one category? I find it extremely hard. Actually, honestly, I could have a white member, all from Western PA, right? It's technically all Western PA, and you will never know their worldview just based on where they're from or what job they have. It's very individual by individual. Sometimes from a really specific town, you could kind of get the sense. But I mean, that sociologically it says something. Whereas like, it is almost always, I find it really easy to talk to Black members. I can have certain assumptions, and those assumptions are oftentimes true in terms of a worldview where no matter who they voted for, you can talk about the same issues, and they will come from this very same moral standpoint of like, yes, we need to do something about our young people. Like, oh yes, like I'm very concerned more than my own wages. I'm concerned about my children, my grandchildren. Like it's a very sociologically, I find white folk to be undefinable, because as people, I don't think anyone in this world is clear yet or has done the work yet to really understand the complete history of consciousness of white folk, even the way they have responded to deindustrialization, and even how they're responding to the disappointments of Trump. Like, even if you look at the news, you'll see like everyone wants to do interviews with like farmers from Pennsylvania. Oh, this farmer is disappointed in Trump because the tariffs are hurting him, but he's still going to vote for Trump. Oh, this farmer, he's unhappy, but he's very unhappy and he might kill himself. Like, you just don't know. And like, it reminded me of this. So anyways, so I feel like one thing we in free school are always doing is the stage of history and at what point of the history of consciousness are we at, so that we can help usher in the future, a new future. And I think the second question that it comes down to is also, it helps clarify for us, well, what is our task as revolutionaries, as revolutionary scientists, sociologists, as revolutionaries? And to kind of prepare for today, I didn't even know how to prepare. I was like, I felt very lost until like we started talking. And I had read the speech by King that he gave after the Montgomery bus boycott in, I think, 1957, where he gave it at like some NAACP event, and he was trying to assess like the movement, and he titled his sermon "Facing the Challenge of a New Age," and he's kind of talking about how what we call the interregnum. That what did you this is part of a very perhaps long transition and painful transition phase, and King like references things that those honestly King is clearly just an intellectual, so interesting, where he says. He was like, what we, even in the 1950s, are going through is like part of an interregnum. He didn't use the word interregnum, but basically part of an interregnum where he says this is a phase where the old is dying, but struggling on its last breath. This is what he does actually say that. And the new is being born, but the new will come in birthing pains. And he says the Greek philosopher Heraclitus had a idea that justice emerges from the strife of opposites, which I think in some ways is a helpful phrase even for us. Opposites, white civilization, Charlie Kirk Memorial, and then like even the speech of the UN of the darker world, or we in free school, like what we're proposing coming from the Black freedom struggle. And then King also references Hegel, of course, growth only happens through struggle. So anyways, it's kind of interesting, but the real thing I also wanted to help contribute
Can I
is
just say, also, that's Frederick Douglass. There cannot be progress without struggle.
Yeah.
He who wants progress without struggle wants the crops without the rain, or the sea without its mighty rule. But exactly what you said.
Yeah, and this is also the speech where King again says this thing where he's like, our task as Black folk is not to save civilization, but rather to inject new meaning into civilization. And it reminded me of what Doc, you said, which is that white civilization on its last legs is only white civilization which once gave value, contributed to humanity, is now just a shadow of itself. And versus like the Black gods, for example, there's still a living civilization. And it's reminiscent of Paul Robeson's quote where he was like, the problem with Western civilization is that there's no more spirit or morality to turn. It's like putting a key into a lock and having no soul to turn the key. And that's the crisis of the West, that the West is constantly trying to put a key back into the lock, and then the key fits, but there's no spiritual energy or morality to turn the key, versus the East or Afro-Asia. But I just wanted to like contribute one thing to like add on one thing about Charlie Kirk and how everyone is trying to say that Charlie Kirk mobilized the youth. And I think he did mobilize a certain group of the youth, the percentage of which I'm not confident of. And I also think it's a really specific kind of youth in my eyes. But like actually, I started looking up polls, that recent polls on the youth. Most recently, the spring 2025 Harvard poll, like the Kennedy School at Harvard, they did a poll on American youth. And it was kind of interesting because it said only 19% of what's considered Generation Z. So it's 15 to 29-year-olds surveyed. 19% of Gen Z said that they trusted the federal government to do the right thing. Only 19%.
Whoa.
And that's across the political spectrum, of so-called political spectrum. Only 18% had confidence in Congress, 23% in the presidency, and 29% in the Supreme Court. And I mean, this is to just say that, like, I think we should also be clear on when people talk about Charlie Kirk and he like killing him is like killing a certain section of the youth, or let's also be scientific and real about actually this generation coming into consciousness, how they are seeing the world as a reflection of the moral crisis of the country or civilizational crisis of the country. And actually, when you do it, if you analyze it by party lines, the self-reported Democrats of Gen Z, only 23% said they trusted the federal government, and that was down from 42% in 2017. Yeah, and then actually it was the self-reported Republican Gen Z people who were consistently around. It wasn't much change from 2017. It was always around 29% trust in the federal government. And then what's also interesting is like, because this does come to civilization, is like when asked to define what you think defines the identity of America as a nation, for both self-reported Democrats and Republicans of the youth, and this is also with independents, 35%, which is the greatest voting bloc, said that they believed that what defined America is individual rights and freedoms. And, you know, and I think that says something because in some ways King was ushering in the whole concept like that we talked about with the letter from Birmingham jail, is King saying the task in America, he actually says this in his speech, Free the Challenge of New Ages. The challenge in America is that we have had all the science, political science, technological science to develop like one world that's one neighborhood, but we have not created a brotherhood. Or he says that that geographically we're one, but we must make ourselves spiritually one, which I think is what you're saying, you know, this reference to like there is a primary political subject that is new in the world, and that is humanity. And it has political implications even in terms of the state, the society, a new America, where it's not sufficient enough to define a civilization and then a state and laws, a law-based state or a law-based society of protecting individual rights and freedoms anymore. But we're at a stage in history, or stage of consciousness, where there is a revolutionary task that's also a moral one, which is we must go from individual rights and freedoms into one that believes that there can be no individual anything without the will of all, or single garment of destiny, that all life is interrelated. So
This is so valuable.
that's what I found interesting with polls, that like
Yes.
the youth did say like, oh, the American identity is defined by individual rights and freedoms. And then where it divides is that then from there on out, that was the only common denominator. Self-reported Democrats said that the second thing that defines America is diversity and civic engagement. And then self-reported Republicans said family values and Christian values. So it's kind of, I mean, it's interesting. And then I just wanted to raise a few more numbers, which is like a separate poll from 2025 that only accounted for results from 2024, is that, again, 15 to 29 years old youth, that in the world just ranked in terms of no confidence in the national government. Greece, which is kind of your top standard of like extreme no center, because Greece is in such turmoil, was first for no confidence in national government among their youth at 87%. And then the US was third at 66%.
Who was second?
Italy. Yeah, which is interesting, right? Italy with the anti-fascist tradition.
Yeah.
The Italy with like the anarchist tradition. So Italy was like 67%, I think. US at third at 66%. And then
What was ours now?
66%.
Okay.
And then the next category were like the other European countries like UK and whatever. They were at like 40%, 30%.
How about Spain?
I don't remember. Spain was, I think, not that high. It was like maybe middle of the pack. But it's interesting because like I think they were only showing Western countries. Yeah, they're only ranking Western countries. And then for the category of this is all these results are from polling youth, where like dissatisfied with education, the US was again third to Greece and Italy at 37% dissatisfied of the youth are dissatisfied.
No, 37% satisfied.
Dissatisfied. Oh wait.
The larger number, the 60-some percent, is dissatisfied.
That would have to be true.
I don't know. Maybe I looked at the numbers wrong. But then for children not respected, this is interesting. They also polled, do you think children are respected? And Greece was at 60. Oh, children not respected. Greece said 62% said children are not respected, and the U.S. came in second at 32%. 32%.
That's it.
70.
No, I'm pretty sure it was 32%, because the rest were like at 5%, 6%. So like 32% still considered like it was considered pretty high, but Greece is just like an all-time high. I'm pretty sure.
This is very interesting. Can I just ask
Yeah.
a question? Because they are measures of a crisis of legitimacy.
Yes,
And I think, check that out again, because,
okay,
see, I think the numbers for the United States are so high when you get the Pew studies and all of those where, where 80% say the government doesn't represent them, and,
right,
the dissatisfaction level, which is general. And I think for the youth of the United States, it's even higher, the
yeah.
distrust. So I think, just check that. I mean,
Yeah,
somehow
I'll check
that'll
it.
come- yeah.
Well, so maybe the poll itself was flawed, but
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure I
maybe,
read, I think
yeah.
I read the data.
But I think you, go ahead, you go ahead,
No.
because I want to comment.
No, that was basically it, like,
That's
yeah.
I'm very happy you did this research, because you lose the youth, you lose the future.
right,
And even though we don't know completely where the youth are, what spaces they occupy, what they're listening to, one thing we know, there's a high level of dissatisfaction.
yeah,
And most youth do not see a future for themselves. I don't care how much elite education you have, they don't see a future for themselves. And okay, just on this history of consciousness, which I think is very important, and I think this data are elements, empirical elements of trying to understand a history of consciousness. But if you take the world's people, and this, I think, is a great transformation in human consciousness, where they're not just conscious, but they're conscious of themselves as part of a large civilizational whole.
that's interesting.
You know what I'm saying? This self-consciousness, if you go back, let's say you go back 70 years, 75 years ago in China. And I get this, when y'all come back from China, a lot of times what y'all talk about is the change in consciousness, and if you went 70 years ago, the Chinese peasant, he didn't know, or she didn't know the world of Africa, anywhere else. They just knew that they were suffering in their part of the world, And so you could even argue that the level of consciousness of the white West was higher than the level of consciousness of China, let us say. Today, the darker world is more conscious of itself and of humanity than the West is. The West is lagging. But then you have this question, I think, and Emily, this is very important. I hope you pursue this more. Youth don't feel there is a future.
Yeah.
And then I think I'm interested also, if you could find it, if there are studies of the consciousness of children. Well, we're talking about, what would we call, let's say 8 years old up to 19.
Yeah.
But I think this is devastating information to understanding the history of consciousness and the rupture, the separation of the people from the ruling elites, be they corporate, and then their willingness to kill the ruling elites.
Yeah. That's why I agree with what Samir's saying about actually a Tyler Robinson makes sense. Because especially when you look at those numbers, it makes sense that even what Fati was saying, Tyler Robinson, this Mormon, grew up in the shooter of Charlie Kirk.
Yes.
And then you add on the fact that he grew up in Mormonism that had such growing up with a worldview where you're raised to believe that there must be a divine explanation for your existence on earth. Being a part of the chosen people, I must have a mission. And then when you become disillusioned with like your own community or whatever, and then you believe that Charlie Kirk represents hate, then in some ways it makes sense. All these different forces, complex forces, and the way it leads to a young white person like Tyler Robinson. That actually makes a lot of sense.
What's his name again?
Tyler Robinson.
Tyler Robinson, yeah. It makes all the sense in the world, I would say, for the reason that you suggested. But, you know, the narrative is that he did it because his partner was transit. That's about that much of it.
Yeah.
There's a general dissatisfaction. And I don't know how you all would assess this. How would you assess support for what he did among youth, let us say? Just based on your own. Go.
In the when I was in college, it became popular to virtue signal, and virtue signaling, you know, where there's a whole discourse around it. I was reading an article, I think it was in some sort of center-left magazine, that was talking about vice signaling and young men, especially from I don't know if you guys heard of 4chan and internet culture, and how it became to sort of be an edgy sort of humor instead of the opposite, to signal vice, to signal that you're disgust, to signal, you know.
This is, you know, the reason I ask, you know, a sizable proportion of free school has grown up in suburbs. And, you know, if you don't know that life, like I don't know it, it's hard to, you know, so what is it like? Now, I know, you know, y'all are Asians and not white, but what is it like? And what, like Fatih was saying, the Mormonism, out of that came Tyler Robinson. But I don't know, what is, if you don't mind me asking.
Oh, like how do you say suburban?
Yeah, I mean, is yeah.
I grew up with a lot of Mormons.
Speak up a little bit.
Well, I feel like this gets to the question of the sociology of white people.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it actually is pretty difficult, I think, to pin
Yes.
somebody like Tyler Robinson down, where I do think there's like a very large element of chance. Where like sociologically, I'm like, oh yeah, like I know a lot of Mormons. I grew up with them. A lot of them are like kind of like Asian adjacent, where like they would all be in like orchestra and stuff. But then yeah, like they all go to BYU. They're like basically
BYU.
it's Brigham Young University.
Okay.
And so it's like a Mormon university, but basically like they get sent off to do missionary work in like Mexico or like Colombia or like random countries. And so a lot of them speak Spanish because they get shipped out when they're like 21. And I feel like I've read some stuff saying like, oh, some of it is to like push them out into the world so they see how hostile it is, that which makes them want to come back and then be part of the safe like white Mormon land. But then they get married really early too. And I feel like but I think that it's like Mormonism on the one hand, the internet culture like on the other hand. But then I feel like even it's like I feel like for me seeing Tyler Robinson is like oh, there are a lot of things that he has in common with like people I know or like people like me. But then on the other hand, it's more difficult, I think, to actually try to track what happens in the inner world of a human being to be driven or to decide to make like that kind of choice. So,
I just add on, I forgot to add that, I think that also what you're saying about, is kind of important, but also important to say that he rejected his upbringing, and, the argument, or the one phrase, the way of putting it I heard was, in 6 months he went to college and he rejected all of that. Apparently he rejected the whole worldview of his parents, and it is sort of difficult to see where he was as an individual without reading his private conversations. But something that I think stretches to from Tyler Robinson to you know, Philly, myself, the suburbs, to all young people is and sort of the Western conception of this idea of a romantic revolution, you know, sort of drives the anarchism and the individualism where Tyler Robinson, he did want to have a purpose, and it's an escape into a romantic adventure where he wanted to kill this guy and then hide out and never tell anybody and die.
Yeah. Because everybody doesn't know how long we've known each other.
Okay.
And I remember you when I won't say you could have been a Tyler Robinson.
Close.
You could have been, huh?
I think so. I see
Tell me why. I didn't want to implicate you.
Because I see myself in Tyler, but also the escapism aspect, which I think is common across all people, more Mormon or otherwise.
I feel like he would.
Because can I just say one other thing about the small thing? Because if I'm reflecting back, and when I say I knew him, it wasn't just like I knew him from afar or he was never in a classroom of mine. I knew him from activism, from Students for Justice and Palestine. We knew each other. And then he was in free school. But I recall your high level of anger. Also, and this is where I think you might overlap a little bit with Charlie Kirk, because you were aligned with many of the early transgender people. Am I right? As I was, they were in free school.
Yeah.
Me and him, we were on parallel tracks. I'm like OG, he's like young boy. But he's suburban and
Close to move.
Everything that would put him on a path to a Charlie Kirk type moment.
Tyler Robinson.
Tyler Robinson. Not, but what was that? Is that fair to say, man?
Yeah, and I think.
And then ends with you going down to Washington and scaring your parents to death.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah, long as I accumulated a short list of felonies, and was made my parents very upset. But I never felt like the legal system would punish me, and it was very revealing because I was not black, and I got frustrated at that because I was looking up to Mumia and all the political prisoners was a very popular slogan, and I was like, no matter what I do, I'm not the same political threat, and the system will just move me along because I'm an angry suburban kid, and
albeit a Muslim.
Albeit a Muslim, and so there's the whole immigrant question. But I think I'm similar to the other people in free school where that process, that whitening process, was disrupted by the free school, and so then you're presented choices of what you can do to move on after. So then I had to work on myself while I had those felonies hanging over me, and I could be, involved in quote unquote protest politics that other young people were involved in, and then also I wanted to be involved in free school stuff. And Meghna Nandita told me, hey, you can't be involved in this politics and this politics at the same time because it attracts negative attention. So I do have the preschool to thank for disrupting that. And even though I was a angry young suburban youth, I was also conscious of the fact that there were a lot of my young black friends who were also in the same position, who would be treated differently, and the different experiences that young black people at Temple, young immigrants had at Temple and SJP, and then also the young white people, because there was a young white person from Socialist Alternative who, because I was not white, he just assumed I was in Real Justice, so he came up to me and said, all you guys do is talk shit. I said, yeah, but we're right, So, but those are the Temple days.
Good.
I'm just thinking more about the challenge of doing a sociology of white people,
Yeah.
where it seems like, yeah, like the fundamental problem is that white people, which is like a modern thing, have so long conceptualized themselves as individuals that it makes it impossible to even have like basically principled unity or even recognition of any category beyond like themselves. And I feel like in some ways that is kind of, yeah, like what's happening broadly in the white world, like between, I guess, the factions of like pro-NATO, neoliberal, like the Trump, and they're just kind of, yeah, like tearing each other apart, which is what we've been talking about over the last few months. But like even, yeah, like in the Kirk Memorial, it's like Candace and Tucker like talking about Israel, and then like Stephen Miller, like Chris Rufo, like people who are super Zionist, like they can't actually let it go and say like, oh, we love Charlie, so like we're gonna put it aside and like, we know where we stand. Like, no, they still have to fight it out. And I feel like really there aren't any. I had questioned what, if any, underlying principles there actually are in this movement. Where I feel like it actually is held together by the strength of like Trump's personality.
And they're having won the election too.
What?
They're having won the 2024 election.
That election, but that can only carry them so far.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like even with this, the mandate, like most of the actions that the Trump administration is taking, I feel like are actually very unpopular. Like the sort of ravaging of all of the federal agencies, like picking people up off the streets, like these very violent like deportations, like alligator Alcatraz. I feel like those are not actually popular, popular campaigns. And yeah, I think that I just agree with what Emily said, where Charlie Kirk is being used as a symbol to try to unify, but he's not actually a unifying symbol of like peace. And like even when they're talking about like, oh, like Charlie Kirk lived for like democracy and Western freedom and peace, he was a peace-loving man because he debated and like tried to like argue with 18-year-olds. Like it's a very like, yeah, it's just a very like flimsy conception of peace. But I feel like just like the group dynamics of what MAGA actually is, where I feel like in some ways it has been struggling with these basic issues of defining itself for actually the last like 5+ years. And I was thinking about it because like in some ways for us, like the most basic thing that we could identify, which actually could have united the MAGA movement, was peace and war, like in a genuine way, where when you're actually confronted with what peace really means, it forces you to bring up that category of humanity, all life being precious. But instead, like if you just have peace on the basis of like, oh, America first, manufacturing, like we don't want white people to die, like deaths of despair, like that does not actually get you to where we need to be. And it's also like thinking about what the prospects are for the MAGA movement at this point, now that Trump actually is in power, and a lot of the policies are like very destructive and like disturbing. And then even like this thing of JD Vance, or like the future generation, which was, I think, like JD Vance and Charlie Kirk, neither of whom have like, I feel like they don't have, okay, like Charlie Kirk, like whatever, can talk to people. JD Vance is not very charismatic, but like supposedly he's like an intellectual. And I was thinking about it because I was reading a lot of like Christopher Rufo articles yesterday to like try to make sense of some of the stuff, and he had basically positioned JD Vance as like a new counter elite, or the prospect of a new counter elite. And this was like when Trump had chosen Vance out of all of the people that he could have chosen to be the VP pick. And actually, like he was saying, like Trump comes from like the elite, but he actually is able to connect and resonate with non-elite people, whereas JD Vance grew up in like Ohio, was like poor, but then he made his way up like through the Marines and Yale, and now actually JD Vance can court the elite, like what like Elon Musk, like Andreessen, like Peter Thiel, and then basically bring in an elite that will be friendly to the Trump administration or the MAGA vision, so that they can actually seize power. And I think it does have to do with this conservative vision of like rule or governance, where Jeremiah and I are talking about this too, but basically like what we've been talking about, where Trump is trying to seize or capture state power, but it's not really through like a democratic process or even a democratic mass movement at this point. It's that he was voted into office, and then that gave him sufficient capacity to then sort of like use a battering ram to try to demolish all the agencies or all of the other institutions that might try to stand in its way. I think it is like a question of is it appropriate to think of these people as a new elite? Like, what type of elite are they? What is their relationship to the actual people? And I think this does get to like the sociology of white people, because like I feel like when we talk about the Black proletariat, there is such a thing as leadership that is recognized. But I feel like for white people, I'm like, yeah, like what is leadership actually? Like, is it just like vibes? Is it just like, oh, I'm feeling you today? Like, what are the actual principles for like white leadership? Because I feel like even the longevity of Trump is like kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, okay, like what is it based on? He does things that a lot of people don't like. Like, actually, I feel like many people I feel like would say like, he did this thing that I don't like, but I'm still with him. He did this thing I don't like, but I'm with him. And yeah, but I think basically what I feel is that even this attempt to place a new elite, even if it is in opposition to the existing like democratic neoliberal ruling elite, even that new counter elite is still not really acceptable to like the vast majority of people.
So
And that new counter elite is also not very capable of winning the trust of the people. And I feel like in some ways, like I think that's also kind of what like the Tyler Robinson, Charlie Kirk shooting is like starting to mean to me, where it's not even so much where it's like, oh, like by killing Charlie Kirk, I'm doing like a good deed. It's more like, no, like this is not acceptable to me. Like I do not accept this being like the future, like the face of the future, or like being normalized as like a legitimate force. Yeah.
Say that one.
Yeah, like Charlie Kirk.
Oh, Charlie Kirk. What
Like-
would be simple? I'm sorry.
Like Robinson saying that?
Yeah, or like just that, like it's not, I don't see it so much as like a moral thing of like, I'm vanquishing evil from the world, like that. Like it could be partially that, but I feel like another layer of it is like, I think it is still like a nihilistic thing of like, both of the options that are presented to me, neither are acceptable.
I could kill either side.
Like, well, like maybe this one is more like morally repugnant. Like this one actually is hideous. I don't accept this one, but I don't know if it's necessarily like for like basically like the three visions of the world of like NATO neoliberalism, like the Trump white civilization thing, and then like the darker world. I feel like it's not really in the framework of seeing like the darker world or like the category of humanity. Like,
He just knows that he's dissatisfied
he just knows that like this can't be,
and he must take action.
like he has to do something to take action. But it's more, I feel like it's the messiness of the transition phase. I feel like I just feel like there are a lot of people who are really feeling and very wrapped up in the fact that this is a messy transition phase, but can't necessarily see like the full way out. And yeah, and I think it also does have to do with this question of like the loss of the center, like a civilizational center, because, and it also, I think that's also like sort of the sociology of white people, where on the one hand, like people literally talk about Western civilization and whiteness as like the guiding light. But then on the other hand, when actually thinking of the ways that you could create a center, it's like just really silly stuff of like, oh, like, are we a secular country? Like, do we all believe in the Constitution? Like, have we all like signed an oath to like uphold the Pledge of Allegiance? Or yeah, like, are we going to go back to Christianity and like family values where like the man is the head?
The way you put it is the way David Brooks is described. Oh, did you hear this?
Yeah, it was really like, it was just like boring, or just kind of like,
Kind of, yeah. Go ahead.
where, yeah, I don't know. I think it's like because I do feel like maybe 3 years ago, I found the ideas a lot more interesting, where I was like, okay, but I think it's because maybe like the civilizational crisis was emerging. And so I felt like this sort of grasping in the darkness was like, oh, like at least you're dimly recognizing that there is a civilizational crisis. And you're trying to explore the ideas that you think might be able to like stop the hole from getting bigger, to be able to like plug it.
Yeah.
But I feel like at this point, it has gotten so far beyond that, where like the hole in the wall is like just a massive abyss.
Yes.
And I don't know why like the ideas, I guess, are still so basic or just like trapped under like a.
When you say trapped, if you don't mind, what do you mean trapped?
It's just like they don't really have much imagination
No.
or like boldness.
Well, could you say they don't have many options?
Yeah, I mean that's what it seems like. But I think that's also the question of like the white imaginary.
Just a small question. You read the David Brooks
Yeah.
this morning?
No, I read it like a few days ago, but it was so boring I forgot who wrote it.
Oh,
It was the one about God and
Guardian
politics.
yeah, maybe that one. I read it this morning. I mean, I read
there's
another
another
one. It's another one where he and Ross do that. It's the same question. That if we cannot, the point that, well, what Brooks was saying is he was, I think, criticizing a lot of what went on with the Charlie Kirk Memorial, and he was saying, he was probing the idea that religion and politics, if politics takes over religion, is it still religious? And shouldn't it be a separation of secular values? But you should not or cannot eliminate religious values, which are of a higher magnitude.
Yeah, and the article Brooks was actually one of the.
Which one is this?
I think it's the God and politics.
Today
It
one?
was maybe like 2 days ago.
Okay, all right.
Why are they making that move like that?
Say that
It's
again?
because
Why are they making this a question to
At all.
ask right now?
Yeah.
Oh, this,
because the Charlie Kirk Memorial, like if you watch it, it's like literally like an evangelical like mega church event. That's what it looks like.
that's right, it did.
But it's like in a stadium.
Stadium.
But it's like in the way that like evangelical like movements, they usually do fill up. They do fill up stadiums. They have concerts. Like yeah. So
You've
it's
been
like,
to one.
I've been to them before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
revealing all your secrets.
And actually, JD Vance himself has started taking
Yeah.
like explicit,
Yeah.
explicit Christian/Catholic stances on Twitter.
Yeah,
Right.
well, because he also said in the memorial where he was like, because of Charlie's death, I have become the most vocal about my religion and my faith.
Now, he's a Catholic though,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and this is very interesting
Right.
because they're trying to paper over it with this Judeo-Christian,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
so the historic rift between Catholics and Protestants.
Right, but one of the interesting things that Brooks said in that article from 2 days ago was that he was like, in American history, the only example of like a positive linking of politics and religion was the civil rights movement.
Who said this?
David Brooks. And he was like, the civil rights movement was the only movement that actually worked out like a real relationship.
Oh, I don't know. No, I'm just.
Well, I think that they're invested in it. I think that the people who were involved in the Charlie Kirk Memorial are invested in it because I feel like some of the evangelical Christian stuff has been very political, where like even with like the Zionism, like the role of Israel, like I think also like their really hardline stance on like abortion.
Yeah.
And I feel like they do see a link between their religion, like their religious values, and then like state power in a way. And but I think then it has taken on greater significance and like fervor because it's also like a really emotionally charged event. And so I think that's why people like David Brooks are like, hey, like this isn't the kind of rational, like secular politics that I'm comfortable with. I'm worried that we're like basically going to go on another set of like the Crusades. Like I feel like that's kind of the vibe that I was getting from the David Brooks article, where it was like, oh, like I kind of want like a secular discourse so that like maybe we can just turn things down a notch a little bit. And so it's not to say that like David Brooks is necessarily like right, but I think it's just that like it's for like people are trying to maneuver and then are going in like weird directions.
No, I wasn't disagreeing with the assessment that you're making about David Brooks. I just think that I was going to ask the same thing. Like, in part of this discussion is the nature of religion and like whether you say as power or the state but it's on the table. And then on top of that, what's on my heart is the point that you're making about Black men again. And I don't mean to bring something up that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but it has to be situated in this kind of figuring out of the narrative and the options that political forces that we're putting on the table and trying to assess are faced with. Whether you had brought up the prison industrial complex, the period between 2017 and 2020, or 2020 to 2025, meaning the period after 2013 in Black Lives Matter, and what a question in my head is actually for Doc more too, which is like that, how do you deal with that transition of politics being ideological and scientific and led by real parties and forces, you know, from the amassing of the Black freedom movement to a demoralization of politics, and like there's no, or like there's a different way that I would say, whether you want to say the Black community or Black men specifically,
Absolutely.
are trying to figure out how to articulate the political crisis. Like, and because you know that Black men specifically are being under pressure. But as that, you know, relates to power, the state, and religion, especially after you bring up the examples of King and the New Age in that speech, the other question is in my mind, and also what you brought up is this a discussion that we're having about Black gods and deindustrialization,
Yes.
which is basically what we're saying is that there are two social systems that exist, whether they compete completely with each other or also seen in another way. But the point is that, like you were saying about America, in order for it to move forward, a system or a social system has to be intact for it to for American society and people to work.
Right.
Let alone civilization to flourish itself, which is like the hope, right? But we're not, because we're dealing with a white social system that has political, social, and civilizational power. But we also are dealing with a social system or a Black social system that doesn't have the same kind of political power. And at times of it trying to amass that kind of even way to talk to each other, if you will, let alone, because it's fucked up. Nobody wants to really sit at the table. You know, nobody wants to be demeaned when you have children to feed and a way of life to live. Like nobody wants to be demeaned. Nobody wants to talk to white people. Nobody wants to present themselves to a white audience and like be not heard or assume that you don't know what you're talking about because you're Black. But that is also a gap. Like this is like, or like something that is a struggle. You know, the struggle of the personality is really what we're talking about. The fragility of white men and the white male personality is what I think is a part of this problem. You know, even David Brooks trying to figure out how to deal with a civilizational problem. But so that being said, I was curious about a couple of things, and I didn't mean to, you know, kind of make it a different conversation.
May I say something? You know, I think Brooks and Dulett are addressing a real problem, that politics has appropriated religion for the sake of power, and that the evangelical movement was fashioned specifically for political
Yes.
purposes. I think Brooks makes that point in one of his essays. That in other words, when we talk about evangelical Christians, they are, or Charlie Kirk as an instance of it, it is political. It is not religion. So it was kind of the, first the appropriation and then the establishment of a religious movement that is designed for politics. So I think and therefore the function or purpose of religion in Western civilization or in American history has been distorted. And therefore, and it's partially a problem in the Black community by having all of these politicians use the church for their own ends, and ultimately the people walk away. In Philly, we can see it from both the church and the political people.
It's happening in Los Angeles too.
Yeah, I'm certain everywhere, Chicago, everywhere.
No,
But-
major cities.
Yeah, everywhere. Where as soon as the church is used, now the difference is that we as Black folk have not created a religious movement which is designed for politics as white people have done. In other words, Charlie Kirk is an evangelical missionary, I guess they would say, whose purpose is solely political, solely power, and not.
They put him up with Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's the as they would put. But I think I'm going back to a phrase that you used, which you denied you used it.
We are.
Okay, the civilizational crisis of the white supremacist social system. I think that is what they can't resolve. Brooks, and you're right, it comes off as boring, meandering, and all. I agree with you about that. I generally like reading David Brooks or do that, these cats, but it's like they don't have an answer. They can't square the circle because the crisis of their religion is also a civilization crisis. Because their religion is a part of a system that we are calling a white supremacist social system. You know what I'm saying? And by that we mean a system designed to produce and reproduce racial hierarchies. It needs white supremacy like we need air.
Can
Go ahead.
I just, it's partially a question, but also me proposing something, which is, I think with religion and politics, like white supremacist social system and stuff, the way I see the history of consciousness and the way it shaped political action and different types of people is that actually I think that we should not underestimate how the civil rights movement thrust upon large numbers of white people a break in their consciousness, because
Who were transformed.
they were transformed.
And acknowledge. Now, is that more than 20%?
We don't know. So,
Okay.
well, that's why I think our what we said about sociology is important, because I do think, because related to Amen, for example, I think in the 1940s, you could actually say there are distinct sociological categories of white people. Hence, Du Bois is the white worker. I think Du Bois's category of the white worker, the Black worker, and the white master is sociologically accurate to reality. I think it's a scientific category. I think the civil rights movement, what it did was in waging a democratic struggle against Jim Crow, it thrust upon large numbers of white people. And it's not me
Can I just say
saying,
one thing? Confirming, without even acknowledging it, the fight against Jim Crow was a fight against the civilization that underpins Jim.
And it qualitatively changed and in some ways better prepared white people to possibly be part of abandoned white civilization and have more of possibly becoming a part of a new people, which is why Baldwin talks in these terms. Like a lot of Baldwin's essays have a kernel of optimism of
Yes.
we have the chance of being the last white nation. We are an American people in becoming.
Mhm.
And it's because of the evidence of the civil rights movement. But, however, I think the reason why we're going to have to, and it's not necessarily the primary goal, but it's part of our work, is a real sociology of what's so-called white people. So-called white people is because
Very interesting.
I'm not convinced that even the people who came to that Charlie Kirk Memorial are the representatives of white people. Because actually, in fact, evidence shows that I think with everything we've talked about with mainline denominations, I think there are large sections of white folk, and we don't know who they are. Are they the educated white folk? Are they the WAFs? Are they the non-educated, blue-collar workers? They're leaving institutions of white gods because white gods do not satisfy them. And I'm not sure if if religion ever appealed to them, because most of Trump's what his campaigning and stuff, Trump is honestly not that religious. He's occasionally sprinkles in like, oh, I'm going to church, Christian. It's actually other people like J.D. Vance, like Mike Pence or Marjorie Taylor, like different people. Those are the ones who are, will invoke religion in different ways. But all I'm saying is that I think that this question of religion and the state and civilization is, honestly, I'm not convinced. I think there possibly are large sections of what we would call the newly disinherited, or the newly self-conscious of their disinheritance and disinherited
Yes.
white people
Yes.
who, like, I do not think an appeal to God actually means much to them, because they're like, God did nothing for me when I couldn't afford eggs. That's why I was voted for Trump. I thought he was gonna I do think that I think it's interesting that the evangelical Christians represent a very specific section of white people or Americans who are interested in elite, what I would say are the ones who are behind potentially an elite capture, a new elite capture of the state. But I don't think that's representative of necessarily large sections of the white population who I am, like I said, sociologically, I'm very confused by. I'm not sure. But I know that they didn't vote for Trump because they thought he was going to bring God back to the White House. There were different reasons. We don't know. And actually, I think a remaining question has to be, just as much as we say it for the Black community, a remaining question is, does King still live in a certain way in the consciousness of certain types of white folk? Or were they still transformed in specific ways, and how? I think we're constantly asking the question of the democratic capacity due to consciousness and how consciousness has changed the political struggle.
Absolutely.
Like, I think that is constantly our question with different sections of the American people, including immigrants, white people, especially the Black proletariat, the Black community. And I think it's kind of useful, the phrase that Doc just used of the evangelical Christians, who are a very specific type of group at this point, are attempting to appropriate religion for political power, but who are they speaking to? And is it even going to be a successful political force? Because in some ways, actually, what Serafina was bringing up with Black men is, I also thought it was really very good that we were able to identify the most advanced section of the American people who waged the last significant political struggle, which is the Black proletariat. The way I think you identified, Doc, as if we're going to achieve a new nation and even achieve state power, it will take a highly disciplined Black community. And one of many major challenges against the Black community, which is also against their advancements of the civil rights movement, their advancements in democracy, their advances in the Black freedom struggle, even the following decades of like Black mayors, is essentially the way the Democratic Party, a weakness is the openness to the Democratic Party and a Black misleadership class, which we're always trying to assess how much is the Democratic Party still a weakness. I do think it's still a weakness in a lot of so-called major Black churches,
Mhm.
which is why the Black gods are so interesting, because the Black god institutions are not.
This is so interesting.
Yeah.
Because the ones that falsely identify as Black gods, even up to this day, they don't have politicians in their
No.
religions, like the Nation of Islam, Noble Drew Ali, Bishop, Prophet Cherry, and they don't have politicians.
And but yeah, in some ways, I think when we talk about like cognitive manipulation, but also the role of the state
Oh,
in
yeah.
actively trying to behead the possibilities coming out of the civil rights movement from the Black community. One of them is, for example, what you mentioned, HBCUs, where it's very strange that HBCUs would have been the first in the front lines
Yeah.
of taking a stand. And no, it didn't seem like there were very large contributions from HBCUs around Palestine,
Mm-mm.
or even the way it was really, actually, it made me emotional when you were like, Lincoln was created to produce Black ministers and teachers. It was literally meant behind the veil to produce leaders in the community who would then create even more leaders through
Yeah.
the church and through schools.
Mhm. True.
And now suddenly it's 19% Black men. And that should be seen as a sign, that should be seen as an active punishment, like an active attack of the state
Yes.
on institutions.
There is no question. I'm sorry, I don't mean.
No, and it's such a deep because, we've been looking
That's
up
what you
at,
and I talk about.
yeah, we've been looking at the Lincolnian, and I found your article, Dwight, that you wrote, and it was really good. It was really good. And actually, I was like, oh, Dwight, was writing with some fire back in the day, and yeah, what am I trying to say? No, but it was, and but basically it made me realize that it's not just Dwight and Doc, but there were many, many, many students. You guys were something common.
Right.
It was common. The Gil Scott Herons, the Dwight Murphs, the Doc. It was common for HBCUs to have
The founder of
thousands.
Black science fiction novels was what it was. What's his name? Charlie Saunders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know him? Yeah. Okay, but go ahead. Yeah.
No, but so
But
yeah.
you're right. And now, and this is our angst. About our alma mater. Who has women leadership, but they don't. And this is. Well, you talk, man.
No, well, my last thing I just want to say before Dwight talks is that I think the role of free school is so important, not just the sociology we're doing, but because, even this thing that Doc, you said, that the American people could become a geostrategic force, and it requires an increasing level of self-consciousness of their role in history, but also it takes groups like Free School to constantly sharpen and present in new languages the revolutionary vision that builds upon King and has evidence already in the consciousness of people, which includes a highly disciplined Black community, but also large swaths of the white community who have abandoned the church, have abandoned their white gods, and who we don't know yet what their responses or possibilities are. And then it also includes immigrants. And so I think that's the stage of history.
If I could make one suggestion to it. See, I think just on this question of white folk, we're dealing more in the realm of probabilities.
Yeah.
You're not
that's
dealing
true.
with certain, more or less certainties or law-like or logic, or logic,
Yeah,
logical. We're not. At least I don't think we can make those
I agree.
kind of, would you agree with
Yeah,
that?
probability.
Whereas with Black folk, it's more certainty. Now, Alice and I, we did the reading group, the Baldwin reading group at Zion Baptist Church. And we happened to run into Reverend James, Bob James, who sees himself as becoming the next interim pastor at Zion. But he's a religious fundamentalist.
Yeah.
Even though he came to almost every session of the Baldwin reading. I don't know that I think he understood, but he saw, I just say, he saw a conflict between his religious values and what Baldwin was saying. Is that fair?
No, I agree.
And we ran into him and, we saw him and came, picked him up and but he was very, very glad to see us, by the way. And, but I don't care how you take this thing with Black folk, there's always the consciousness that we are an oppressed people, which gives a certain certainty to us. Now, of course, when we get to Lincoln, and we look at that layer, that top tier, that leadership, who have been chosen not by Black folk, because the university is so beholden to the state of Pennsylvania for funding. So it's a beautiful place. Where it's located in South, you were there, and now with all these new buildings, and such, it's beautiful to walk around, but it ends there. It is not fulfilling as a historically Black college its mission historically. But when you look at Black folk, there is almost a common consciousness. They almost act in unison most of the time. For example, they'll always tend to vote in presidential elections for the Democratic Party, and everybody would do it, until everybody doesn't do it. But then a new consensus might be in the works. But there is certainty, there's logic, there's, you can study that, you can interview people about these things. But with white people, you're more in the realm of sociological probabilities, variations, and they are wide variations, even within the group. Like you get the group, like you're saying, the group that would, have their predisposition is always to align with Black people. Those people can go from the white far left to white liberals, that Black people, they sense this, so they think this. Black people have provided leadership which freed the country, that freed women, that freed LGBTQs and so on. Martin Luther King, yada, 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 Du Bois, yada, 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 yada. White people, you can't say the same thing, I don't think. And the real option is to align with Black people. The other options are false and short-term.
That's true.
Well, I wanted to say, and on this thing that I feel like I'm really appreciating about our conversation, about the significance of sociology to study something as concrete as the history of consciousness, but also like the state of history that people even self-conceptualize themselves being in, especially when it comes to the sociology of white people. I feel like we started a conversation not that long ago about this, and I'm glad we're developing it more, because what's kind of funny to me is that I feel like sociology has come from a place from like before Du Bois, where it made it was able, like the comp, or like very early sociology of Europe was able to make very concrete, conclusions about, like, say, European society. And then when it came to studying Black folk, they were so ill-equipped. When you bring up like concepts of like, enemies or like pathology, they're just like, ready to, make very sweeping conclusions that don't actually explain very much about Black folk, but only reinforce white supremacy. Almost the sociology is in like a very, I guess, European or like, limited, like it's only meant to study like true units of like society, which is white folk or something. But like, as we're saying,
or what they call normality.
But then at the same time, because of Du Bois, you really have to say that there's a father of a new, but actually true and human sociology, like human action, human science, human behavior, because you take in uncertainty of Black folk, law and chance. And
Yes, yes,
therefore,
yes.
like when you're able to study Black folk, you can turn what seems to be to maybe like a white sociologist to be ambiguities, uncertainties,
Yes.
irregularities, and let's say this family social system or like the family unit or like even the great disruption, the constant onslaught that was like white supremacy on say the plantations. So much disruption, so much tearing apart that even the basic units that would bind people together, a family unit, kinship, mother, father, you know, sibling relationships, even like religion, like the only thing that could be preserved was the church, but
Yes.
everything else is torn apart.
Yes,
Like
yes.
your name, not yours, like your mother, not yours, your children, not yours, like, but the one thing that they could use, like that was uniting was like the church or even religion, but at the same time, like what I feel that we're able to then say, or like Du Bois gives us, is to be able to say like when, and even though there's so much disruption, there was so much that could have disunited Black folk on all these different plantations, like all these different, like originally from Africa, different tribal groups and languages, they still came together. And what happened when the Civil War broke out? They watched, they waited, and then when it was time to move, they moved all at once. And that's still the principle I feel like I found to be really valuable when I even first came to free school in 2020, and we were trying to make sense of what would happen in the 2020 election. And you were saying, just like Du Bois said in Black Reconstruction, Black folk are watching and waiting to move, and when they will, it'll be in one, you know, direction. And that's not, I feel like we're picking up on the ability to be able to like make like concrete or like certain, like find certainties in the behavior of Black folk when for, I guess, a lot of, I guess, academic sociology or even like from, even from the perspective of white folk, they're not sure how to assess Black folk, I guess, or, but at this end, like they're very unpredictable, or like, how do you make sense of such a, like so much quote unquote, like disunity or ambiguity in the Black community, but we're able to say something because of what we're saying in terms of these shared assumptions, these shared values, almost a shared civilizational basis. There is such a thing as a Black community. When Baldwin is asked, like, is there even a white community? There's nothing. You don't have like, as we're saying, like no shared white leadership. Like it sounds like the bases of like even principles that would have united, or they're trying so hard to create a white leader, like Charlie Kirk. It's not even working very well.
So
But
it's
my
really
thing,
trying
so I
hard.
just feel like it's interesting because I feel like we're saying even like white folk are harder and harder to understand because of the evolution in the last century. Their consciousness has been impacted, and they've always been impacted. Even when we're studying like the 19th century abolitionists, or studying Northern Catholic, there's a, you know, always in some ways white consciousness is responding to Black leadership in different ways, small ways, but like not to be underestimated kind of ways. And then of course in the 20th century that takes on a larger form, and now we're asking ourselves in the 21st century, how will white folk take Black leadership at this moment when they have so few options, so few actual white leaders, so few options to turn to civilizationally. White supremacy in some ways speaks of in some ways, but there's also like a revulsion that many have, and this white civilizational
An uncertainty about white supremacy.
and then also what we're saying, like, oh, well, we don't really think NATO works for us that well, so of course not, but then it's like the alternative that, but I feel like what I remembered when I first was trying to process Charlie Kirk's death, almost like 2 weeks ago, was actually the first unit of my like sociological analysis was the white professional managerial liberal class that I was, you know, that make up the majority of the white women that I work with at work. And they're obviously white women, some of them are Jewish, some of them are like Italian American, and they all want to work in something as like quote unquote like civic or like liberal as like public art. So it's a very self-selected group of people, but the one that I report to most directly, and I don't share these details to like, you know, regale you guys with my professional life, but I'm just telling you the reality was that I had a very revulsed reaction to her reaction, which was she almost took a victory lap through the office when Charlie Kirk was killed. And it was painful for me because I think that I have watched them
like be very acidic and like very like bitter like woman actually, because I noticed that where we work in Center City, like very close to the steps of City Hall, but also all throughout Center City, you have to just step over the bodies of Black homeless men who are like trying to sleep, trying to find, sometimes they're very actually active and like maybe they're very angry, like there's all this mental illness, and you have to like know your way to like, you know, not only move yourself off their path and move around them, but you also have to ask like, what even happens for there to be so much homelessness in Center City, so much mental illness, and that like violence is ready to erupt. But like those are not the questions that they ask. They are very righteous women, white women, and I feel so. I have the privilege to have Osiris and Daryl Clark actually. They play at the street corner where I work, and their music walks up into my office. And I find that those are very soothing moments because it can be very barren and sterile, but they hate when that music comes on. They're like conga players, like will sometimes take that same spot. They're like, shut up with this music. They are very, very these are white liberal women, and I find that that same acidity, that same bitterness is almost directed towards Charlie Kirk, as in like they have this visceral reaction also to like white people that represent something so different from them, like a Trumpian wasn't, they probably can't drive through. One of them was actually like about to send her son to college, and she was like, I don't know why he wants to go to Illinois. They like are banning abortion there. She just hates it. I think like white people hate white people so much. It's also like a different like reaction to Tyler, but I thought about it. I was like, that's why I had a certain reaction. I was like, I'm not sure I can also be like, I don't want to be like them when we say like Charlie Kirk's death is like, because I don't want to put myself in that camp, and I feel that sometimes Black folk are also asked to be like, so what do you think of Charlie Kirk's death by white liberals? The Black doorman at my office is asked that, and he's like, don't ask me questions that you don't want the answer to, because yes, I have a reaction and a reason to feel how I feel about Charlie Kirk, but I don't feel the same way about you. Like I don't feel the same way, or like I don't feel the same way as you, and don't use me to make validate you. And so that's where I'm like, the only difference that I feel like I would have in reacting differently to Charlie Kirk's death than you is actually because I do want to make a distinction between white people who are also white supremacists in ways that are not, they may not even be recognized, because again, like to work in like a liberal or nonprofit kind of space, there are people who are so gung-ho about diversity. They want to knock down every like white monument and want to put up, like they want the ugliest like contemporary art made by quote unquote artists of color to decorate the city. And they were so happy when like Biden was elected, but they also hate that Black man on the corner that reminds them that the city is not where it needs to be, because there's a broken or unfulfilled democratic promise that requires them to give up something. And I say all that to say that I think, you know, a lot of us here are college educated. We've gone to like, you know, universities where we've learned how to think in the same way that like all of these, there's a segment of white people that we started talking a lot about in say like a few years ago that are called the professional managerial class. We know how they feel about like questions of diversity or like liberal, or like this question of Trump, hate Trump, like maybe not like the biggest fan of Biden, but like are clearly in the Biden, Kamala Harris camp. But at the same time, like they can represent something of like the white community, but there's also so many other factions and elements, and even maybe the children of those people can't even be quite accounted for. Like those people and their cousins are like totally different. I'm just saying that like, I think we're ready to make certain sociological, we know some things about white people, and then like, and that is why we also proceeded in a certain way when we like found those expressions of their consciousness in say these different election years, and their, you know, what's like in the George Floyd moment, like we're like, oh guys, no, that's like, but then at the same time we're trying to figure out like, actually white people are very hard to study, and there is like not necessarily a correlation between like parent and child, the religion they were born in, like they were raised in, and what they've chosen, and then how I think the next stage has to be basically a white sociology that can like, just as we're prepared basically to do sociology of white people because Du Bois has prepared us on how to study Black folk, that he is able, after writing the souls of Black folk, to write the souls of white folk. And I hope that maybe basically
Can I ask you a
answer the
question?
questions.
Do you have any way of thinking about the sociology of the white family?
That's
Since
really
you
good.
brought up the children and
Well, that's the question, right? Because we were looking at like Tyler Robinson, as I said, and like his parents couldn't really be a predictor of how he would turn out. This question of like, I guess that's why you were asking the suburb question, even trying to understand what like the internet culture has been like men and
Yes,
women,
yes,
and then
yes,
you
yes.
were bringing up even children, like how do you do a sociology of children? And I mean, the statistics from like when children are studied in say like public schools or schools, I mean, then all the things I've read are that there's so much more mental illness among children, white children, but also all children, that are really unprecedented. But I mean, those are the questions I think we're
yeah.
grappling with. I don't have like an
Yeah.
answer. Just
Well, let me let White come in.
Kathy, your description, I agree with so much about, your job about the white liberal. You pointed so much to the inauthentic nature of how they really feel like they're up to a limit. They believe in diversity and all that other stuff, but it's limited. And I know exactly what you're talking about, how they walk through these Black people and they don't, on the streets, and it's like they're limited. So your vision is so correct. I mean, for me, it bridges more to humanity, and also they don't want to be too radical because in some ways they believe sort of the right wing a little bit. In other words, they believe they don't want to go too far to the left, I would say, or they don't want to go too far. But let me just add one thing. I just wanted to listen to you, Jeremiah, when you're talking about Brooks was talking about morality, the Black morality, about the civil rights. The use of God is the grounding, the moral grounding for the white group. When in the civil rights movement, when we used God, we were the oppressed people. And so we turned to God to show the white people the contradiction of what you were talking about. Now Charlie Kirk uses God as a moral grounding, as if white people are oppressed.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Now, how do we move from that? And it's almost like you guys point out how the shift in white consciousness, that battle that you're pointing out, I see it greatly. But also, there's a shift in Black consciousness, which, there's a shift in Black consciousness, and that too is something that needs to be talked about. And the example of that shift in Black consciousness is when you talk about like in person. When we were there, consciousness was we were trying to uplift Black people, the condition. Now the shift is totally different when you think about the whole culture has shifted, and as a result, that affects our beliefs. We have more Black conservatives. I don't think we would have had a Candace Owens when I was,
Thomas Sowell.
Thomas Sowell, but the numbers are so great. And so I just want to say that there's a shift in Black consciousness, and that needs to be analyzed too, as well.
Oh yeah, sorry. My one correction is what Dwight and Kathy said, which is when we were talking about sociology about white people, there is actually one group of white people who are always predictable, and that's white liberals. They have stayed the same since King called them out and led it to Birmingham jail. And they've gained new names like Karens and Becky's, but you can always guess what they will do.
Yeah.
White liberals, social democrats.
Can I just say something, Kathy? I really agree with the way you developed the whole question of sociology.
Yeah.
I would just, and it is, sociology is the site of deep ideological struggle more than political economy, I have to say. With all of the talk of the predictable character of political economy and all of that, you got debates and you got different schools, but the debates within sociology have been the sharpest. As we went through the civil rights movement, and then, of course, the debate over the Black family as a way not to see, which was highly, very political. And then, of course, you might remember the book called The Bell Curve
Right.
by, what's his name?
Charles Murray.
Charles Murray, yes. I mean, that's on the heels of Moynihan and Glaser about the Black family.
Right.
So then you throw into the mix the Bell Curve, which says that Black people, if it isn't the family, we're going to prove to you that they are in the position they're in because they're intellectually inferior. You know what I'm saying? All the time we had Black sociologists who increasingly, I would say, became quieted. And then you get, a lot of them going towards African American studies or social work. They could not have a career within academic sociology, But then the other thing, and this, Jeremiah Nuri would know this better than I, the postmodern move within sociology, in particular Foucault, who was he's a particularly nasty figure because he claimed to be above, first of all, the sociology of race, which is Du Bois, which is most of Black sociology, but also to explain the normal and the abnormal in society, which is a throwback, which is the French style, to Durkheim, and how institutions were the invention of human beings, and the values of institutions represented social normality. So that's why I would all act in this, just in the theoretical level, there is this strong push for white sociology to study normality and abnormality. And because of the color line, they always had the concrete image of the abnormal. And so the abnormal became the way to study the normal. You study the Black family as a way of showing us what not to be. And so it's very boundary setting and highly political. And now I would say highly civilizational. I just wanted to add to what you was. Okay.
I was going to say really quickly, because we were talking about Dwight's article at the Lincoln, and sort of to what Kathy was saying about it is sort of a fashion for white people to hate white people, or this goes back to the George Floyd protests, and so I've been really harsh and critical of the Charlie Kirk supporters, and some of my coworkers, because I agree with some of my coworkers are conservative, and they're quite open and honest. There's nothing nonviolent about them. They're looking for revenge, and the stuff that they can, like my coworkers, just like, oh, I hope I can press the button that kills the Charlie Kirk shooter, and and they can say stuff at work that is just like would get some like my political persuasion fired. But I mean, anyway, there's the other side, like, if that's the wolf, there's the fox, like the Afrocentrists and the Black feminists who represented another wing of white ideology.
That's interesting.
And
that's interesting.
That's what Kathy's talking about.
Can I just say, this is very interesting. Take the Afrocentrists. They wish to define a new normality. The white man is saying that white is normal, and so their answer is that black is normal. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Or the feminists who would make, the black feminists who would, they're all making a normality argument, which is Durkheimian or French sociology. You can even say Auguste Comte if you wish. But the normality argument or the normality mindset in social science. If I could, just one other thing, this might be very helpful. Even in economics, when they talk about a business cycle, they're talking about a normal business cycle or supply and demand, where the supply curve and the demand curve cross. That's the normal state. You know, so if
We're in the abnormal,
you see, this is a problematic.
and no one knows how to deal with it.
This is very interesting. Their sociology does not prepare them for this kind of moment. I hate it. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Samir.
No, I mean, I was just saying to Serafina, like, we're talking about like what Du Bois means with the black swan.
Black swan.
What do you do in a crisis? What do you do in a crisis that takes, when you're talking about quantum physics, what do you do when you're outside the regular set of rules? You need to apply a new set of ruls. Maybe this is Du Boisian sociology, but I was going to say, it's what Kathy was saying about, okay, so these are white people who hate white people. Does that mean that they are, fellow travelers of black people? No, that this is just another set of the same white essence, that we are interested in dividing. We are interested in that's this
Individual.
the individual, or that you were saying, oh well, it applies to Afrocentrists, and their interest in what normal is. The way I've interpreted it is that the Afrocentrists are still idealists in that that ideal, but they're looking for a black ideal. But they still have.
It's the same method.
Yeah, I mean, they still.
But it's the same method, believe me.
You were bringing up the Pakistani gentleman. I mean, even though he could say, "Oh, I'm anti-Israel," the substance of the country was created with the same envision of the purpose of Israel. So that's why I think it was more a partition situation. But
Well,
Okay, go ahead.
I wanted to build on that because in the deindustrialization study group, we've been reading Black Reconstruction, specifically the Black worker, the white worker, and we've yet to get to the planter. But it's been important for us to read those 3 chapters because we felt that it would be important in studying industrialization and deindustrialization, and also the unraveling essentially of white folks since deindustrialization to today. And actually something that stood out about the white worker chapter that we had just read is that I feel that Du Bois was probably the first sociologist of white folk in describing their psychology and their ideals.
And not as normal. He does not treat them as the normal, as the I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I think it's building off what Samir was saying, which is like how much of the white, like what do we even mean by whiteness?
Yeah.
And is there an essence that actually has been that existed at the time that Du Bois was describing, which is pre-Civil War, Civil War, even to today. And I think part of the task of free school is to understand how much it has changed with the development of U.S. history, the civil rights movement, and how much actually still remains as a challenge or a barrier. Because I think in today's conversation, a lot of the uncertainty reminded me of what Du Bois was describing in the white worker chapter. Because in the white worker chapter, he essentially segments he segments white America. The ones that live in the North and are in competition or see free Black labor as competition. The white worker in the South that also sees black or directly sees slave labor as competition. And then those that are free soilers that move west to get away from the competition of black folk, or what they see as the competition of black folk. And I think that what stood out about your, like, I guess beyond what everyone has already pointed out, what stood out about your presentation is what you said, and that white people see, and this is just general, right? White people seeing the progress of black folk as how did
Taking something away from them.
Yeah, and that's also the narrative of the Charlie Kirk. Like, I think Charlie, I think part of me was like, okay, cool. Like, he's a dude that is opening like debate within white people to actually talk about issues, blah, 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 blah. But then what then really turned me off was when he would talk about this Christianity and morality. And then when it came to black people, he basically was like, well, what is justice? Justice is like, you can't take away from me because my ancestors did something. Or, you know,
it's like the reparations debate.
Yeah. And it's like some narrative. And it's like, how does your Christianity actually make sense with your humanity? And that's when, but anyways, I guess I say that to say Charlie Kirk also reminded me of these white workers that Du Bois was describing, you know, all these different segments, but then all of them, some of them being immigrants initially from Ireland, then England and Germany, all of them became white because initially they might have this sentiment, or not sentimental, this is the way Du Bois was saying, where it's like at first they came here and they saw slave labor as unchristian or unmoral. But then in their becoming of white, the issue was like, oh, actually, let's not touch that issue because what we're trying to do is just elevate the position of white. And even the way Du Bois describes it is that becoming white meant that there was not a unity among working white people. Actually, the aspiration was to become the planter or to become the owner of capital. But I say that all to say because, like, I think there's so much from this conversation today that just reminded me of that chapter. And then even going backwards, like why the deindustrialization study group is reading those chapters is, I think we're trying to understand Philadelphia, places like Philadelphia and Chicago, when there was industry and then how it deindustrialized. But I think part of it, or what was very important, and Nur, I know Nuri's looking at me, so Nur can add to it too. What was very important is like, how do we even see a place like North Philadelphia? Because you can look at something but not see it because you don't have you don't know what you're looking at. That was one piece, and then anyone can add to it. But the other thing I was thinking about was you in describing Trump and like the arrogance that you have was really interesting to me. Is like whenever I go to China or when I talk to my relatives, is like I'm like, oh, what do you think of Trump? Or what do you? And they'll like tell me things. And I think what stood out is that they find, and I think this is part of what you were saying about the development of consciousness. And let me get back to it. But it was interesting in that I think people in China really detest a personality or character like Trump. It's something that's civilizational, where even though like when you go to China, maybe the ordinary Chinese person is kind of loud and, you know, disorderly or whatever it is, like whatever it is that happens when you have 1.43 billion people, I think their ideals or what they look for in a leader is actually someone that is not arrogant and is someone that or I guess they're going to say like actually like a disciplined, consistent statesman. And that's been interesting because I think the Chinese people, like you were saying of the General Assembly, is that Trump was a lesson in that I think the Chinese people have for a long time had a certain image of America. And I think Trump has played a role in actually changing, is slowly actually seeing America for what it is. And again, like
So what makes you say?
I think Trump is just, they had the sense of like, you know, whiteness being civil and good. And this is just like, and I think what's changed is that or whiteness as like manners and, you know, development of science. And this was like China 20 years ago when they didn't have a lot of this, as wealthier. And, you know, there's the American dollar, and there's education, higher education. But I think what people are grappling with now in recent years is that was that real, or I think Chinese people are now beginning to see that they are making a compromise, or especially those that are coming here, they are making a compromise between the American dollar and actual American and being an American society. But
Explain that a little bit more. They're making a compromise.
they know that they're here not because America is so great, but because of the American dollar.
Okay.
And if they had to choose, they would rather stay in China and make more money. But because, so they would want to make the American dollar, but live in China. But what was I saying? I think there's the last consciousness.
You might be right.
Crap. I don't remember.
If I could respond. Yeah, I was also thinking about Trump and having to go to the United Nations general, I forget the name of the group.
General Assembly.
The General Assembly. I was talking about it with Jahan, and that need to even assert himself in that way when, I realized that the United Nations General Security Council, United Nations being formed after World War II, compromises the victors of World War II. So you have France, United Kingdom, Russia, United States, and then they, added China. But overall, founded at a time when the majority of the darker peoples of the world did not have a state to be able to represent themselves on the world stage. And so you have these formal colonial powers that are still seeking to impose world governance in a certain capacity with the ultimate veto power of the UN Security Council ruling over the world. And then, when I even look at, and then now Trump, we talked about the divisions of the white man and white people amongst themselves, even in this country. And Trump, I think seeing and experiencing that on the world stage, and yet looking at the vast majority of the world and not being able to be a part of that either. And so I even looked at the proportions of population, despite Europe only compromising 9% of the world with 740 million people, they have 2 seats, right? France and United Kingdom. Africa has 1.5 billion, which is about 18% of the world. They have not a single seat on the Security Council. India has 1.45 billion people, so they're pretty substantial population, about comparable to Africa. Why not them? Why is China the only country that has that high level of authority? South and Central America, 662, which is comparable to Europe, also not represented as well. And so we have people like Petro talking about this need for a world democratic process in light of such atrocities that are being committed in Palestine, this genocide that does not represent the will of the people, and you have this supposed instrument of world democracy that in its makeup and in its actual function cannot carry out the will of the world's people. I find it increasingly arrogant that Trump even needs to go to the General Assembly to assert himself, and I interpret it as a little bit of a concern or panic to need to insert himself over the world's people. And I remember reading about China's recent. They had released a concept paper, the Global Governance Initiative, which speaks a lot of this failure of world democracy, and specifically explicitly talks about the, for example, unilateral sanctions and the Security Council that's able to get in the way of or block any action being taken against such blatant violations of international law. I'm certain that Trump is able to feel on the world stage and this growing unity of the world's people. And whether it's here in America or in the world, if the white man does not get it together, which is reaches arms out to the rest of the world, then he's going to be left alone.
Yeah. I do think that in a way, we've kind of said this before, but I still do believe that Trump, it's almost like Trump is the face that the American empire deserves in a way. Yeah, it's like, and it is partially him that's like forcing actually also the rest of the world to like figure out, like, what does our future look like in the absence or in a world in which you can't even rely on America as a kind of quote unquote stable global hegemon. And so in that way, I actually feel like, I don't know if you would call it progressive, but it's almost like a historically necessary thing. And the other thing I wanted to bring up was actually, if you read some Chinese political discourse, like if you read like Global Times and stuff, like Xi Jinping and other people in the Communist Party of China will use these dual terms of black swan and gray rhino.
They use black swan.
Yeah, so the discourse around it especially came up with the COVID-19 pandemic because that was a black swan event. It's like it's a not highly predictable thing that ends up happening, which then like totally changes the situation. But then they also talk about gray rhino events, which are it's a highly probable event, which you kind of see from a distance and you see it approaching and you don't act on it until it's too late. It's like, so it's like literally a rhino that's like from a distance and you're like, oh, it's just standing there, but like, I'm not going to do anything until like right up until it's in your face. And so actually you can look at like even whether we call it civil war or not, like the possibility of increasing violence, let's say in America, gray rhino, because it's like increasingly, I see it as a gray rhino, increasingly likely, and everyone sees it happening, but it's like no one feels like they can do anything about it, or it's like whatever they can do about it is like not adequate. And so
Unless the black swan appears.
Right, unless the black swan appears, which I think is also like that's my even understanding of like what we would mean by a revolutionary movement, which is not a divine intervention, but people making an intervention. Whichever parts of the American people, whichever forces among the American people, especially Black people, making an intervention into American society to avert like what would be otherwise like a course of calamity. And like I think that the last thing I wanted to say was also to connect it to like the religion stuff, because from my understanding, or one way that you can even interpret the civil rights movement is as like bringing a certain new type of religious experience into the public sphere. Like when they were doing like the sit-ins, like the marches, like all of that stuff in the public, like what we call the public domain, like that is almost like fomenting a new kind of religious experience, not just for Black people, but also for white people, because it's so explicitly organized around and structured around and framed around like, Christian love, Christian morality. And I actually think that that's also partially like, because I don't discount the evangelicals in part because I feel like I like grew up around them, but I think a lot of what, even aside from the question of like the search to like be close to power, I think a lot of what drives evangelical movements is like the search for a religious experience, which it's like, you have to like experience it, you have to like be around it to have a sense of it, but it's like, like all the mega churches, like what basically are like, they're trying to do like concerts and stuff. And it's like, you can laugh at it, but for a lot of people, like, it's like maybe the only thing that they have in their lives that gives them meaning and gives them a sense of like, a sense of grandeur, a sense of like, in a more charitable way of being like, oh, like I can touch the divine, like I can touch God, even if it's like a white God, but like that's at the spiritual level, at the psychological level, that's how I explain the attraction of the evangelical movement, even aside from the politics.
Can I ask a question? Because I was making the claim that it was a movement designed for the struggle for power, for politics,
Yeah.
and not the other way around.
Mhm.
It was not appropriated by politicians. It was designed for politicians.
Mhm.
Is that a fair?
I think I would say from whatever my limited understanding is, I think it's yes, but also I don't know if it explains everything about the grassroots appeal of the evangelical.
There are some truth.
Yeah, like I think that there are true believers. At like at the level of like why like ordinary people are attracted to it. Not so much like let's say like the pastors, the Christian leaders. Like I think a lot of those people are basically just like corrupt.
Can I ask a
versions of
question?
politicians, yeah.
I mean, you take the way it performs, its trajectory.
Mhm.
One thing is clear: they establish a clear enemy
Mhm.
that almost Satan has infiltrated our society. You have abortion, you have trans life, and all of that type of thing.
Mhm.
So, it's like a crusade.
Mhm.
Crusade is a quote religious movement.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of that is true. My hunch or my sense of it is that it can't work without that, even the appearance of like the divine,
I could see that.
like the divine experience, like the religious experience. It's like, I remember because I grew up and there's like this, I don't know if it still exists anymore, but like there's this place that's called International House of Prayer. It's in Kansas. And like their shtick was that they had someone praying there 24/7. But it's like you have these like droves of like white people, immigrants, like Christians who are drawn to these places. And it's like it's really intense because like I mean Blaise has talked about this too in a different context, but like it's like everybody's like speaking in tongues, like people are praying really like fervently, and like there is that kind of psychic aspect to it, which I think like I'm just bringing it up because like I think it's like it's a powerful even motivator or engine of like okay, like if you ultimately are interested in a political project, like an ideological project, but even I mean more broadly than less, like what we say, a civilizational project.
Yes.
The reason why it works, at least in my reading, is because it's able to create that experience. And the last thing I'll say is that actually, like, even if we're talking about white people, I think that there are both like white people who are increasingly maybe attracted to this, but then there are also like amongst the people who turn away from it. But I think actually in some ways the common denominator is like what we have talked about of like the stranded populations of white people.
Oh yeah.
People who feel like they've been abandoned.
Yeah.
And so therefore either you turn to a stronger white God.
We have to factor that stranded
Yeah, a
population.
stronger white God, or you abandon that altogether. But in some ways, like the source of the dissatisfaction, which can either push you in different directions, to me feels like the same common thing of like not just stranded by like your local government, but stranded by society, stranded by the state, stranded by like this civilization.
Alone.
Yeah, like alone. And so like that's how I partially explain like in either direction it goes, like what compels people.
Can I just want stranded populations and precarious precarity, you know, and that's a lot of what you see in the Butler, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry.
I feel like what we're saying is that white people are definitely capable of change and of action, like of the Tyler Robinsons, and then also like I feel like the changes even within like a generation or family or people living in the same town. And those changes can actually be very dramatic. And I feel like that is important for us to like take seriously because so much of what we're interested in is basically theories of change, changes in consciousness.
Yeah.
But I feel like the open question is that like what principle are these changes occurring? Is there a logic to it? Is there any sort of scientific way in which these changes are occurring? And I feel like that's kind of one of the big questions that I feel like the sociological study is very interested in, but just to try to understand, like, we acknowledge the large chance element of it, but is there any sort of scientific law or any sort of pattern that would make sense and would help explain, or also, yeah, like help us to better understand, I think, white people in this time? Because I keep going back every week to you saying that 20% of white people, but the thing is, we don't know these 20% of white people. Like, we don't know where they are, we don't know where they come from, who they are, if they exist, if it's actually 20%. And I feel like that's something that we can't just like take for granted. Where I do believe that like white people have been like transformed or touched by the civil rights movement. But I feel like for me, it leads to really concrete questions of like, yeah, like, how do white people like interact with Black people? How do they know Black people? Like, what do they think of them? Are, like, when Du Bois talks about race contact, like, is there positive race contact? What are the new forms of negative race contact? Like, does the Black proletariat have a conception of like the white worker as separate? Or are there new categories of white people that are more relevant? Like all of and yeah, I think like the human, like basically like, are there universal human principles that also still like apply to white people after like being coerced into like this manipulation of like believing in a white identity? And I feel like it's also important, yeah, in the context of like the evangelicals, where even if there is like a truly cynical and like corrupt leadership action, like what are the ways in which they actually like do like lead to like people truly believing or truly committing themselves to like a particular way of life? Because I feel like ultimately, like, yeah, like are white people driven just by cynicism alone, or are there still like human elements that thus like can actually be organized into like, I don't know, like an actual like civilization that would make sense and have coherence to it?
That actually reminded me of the David Brooks article that came out last week, which you sent me, An Era of Dark Passions. And you know, it was really interesting because he brings up the civil rights movement in this particular essay that released like 2 days ago, and he also quotes King in this last essay.
I mean, the one that's out today.
No, in the last one, in the last week article, he quotes King, and he says that, you know, the way that I interpret it is that we have to look towards King if we have to find a way out of this era of what he calls dark passions, where people are, you know, manipulated and their passions are, you know, invoked in, you know, incorrect ways to be utilized for violence and revenge and all of these things. And you know, when I was reading that, and I think I told you about it, which I was like, I'm acknowledging the reality of the situation, but I'm also thinking, okay, but where is the hope in all of this? Like, do we just give up on these people or not? I mean, because that's the question that I had. Because in the last article, he says that, you know, people only believe in democracy because they can't stand the idea of one person or one group of people running their lives or running the country or running the state. And I was like, that goes against everything I know about democracy that Du Bois talks about, or the kind of vision that he at least espouses. And you know, I really don't want to believe that is that's the future that we're going to have to go towards, where we distrust people, where we're always cynical, and we're always saying that, you know, we cannot have fruitful relationships, so why not just stay alone? Which is what brings in the whole question of sociology, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you talked about sociology and, you know, the normal and the abnormal, it made me think of this one thing that Baldwin said, which is that no matter what, it doesn't matter whether white people know what they want or what they are. What they know is that what they are not, which is black. All they know is that they're not black, and that is what sustains them, and whatever else they know is a lie. And you know, this connected to what we're reading in our reading in a Black Reconstruction, where Du Bois says that there's this psychological wage of whiteness.
Yeah.
You can be as poor as a Black person, but then you are convinced into believing that your whiteness pays for something. And this is also, this is also what Baldwin talks about when he says that there's a cost, there's a price to be paid. All of these allusions to a price or a cost to be paid if you are Black also relates directly to what white people have to gain by being white, and this is what is in crisis, really. What are you gaining by being white? What are you gaining by being Christian and evangelical and having these guardrails which don't have a foundation almost, which tells you that you have to go to church, have a family, but then you're not really responsible to either of these things. So it does make me think about, okay, how do you really do the sociology of a white person if there's no foundation? Like, the Du Bois, when I read Du Bois and he studies the Black family or Black society, there's a foundation. Like, he starts from somewhere. He starts from slavery, Reconstruction, and so on. And there's a very concrete religion that sort of holds them all together, because church was the only thing that was sort of allowed during slavery. That was foundational, really. But for white folk, there's really...
This is very interesting, and it's I don't know whether this is the way out. Maybe it's difficult to have a sociology of white people, and it ends up being a social psychology of white people.
Yeah.
And to separate the study of white people from white beliefs in a certain way, because they believe that they have a mythological history of themselves. But in regard to this history of consciousness, if Du Bois is right, and personal whiteness is a 19th and 20th century thing, in other words, white people as white people are very recent. They can't claim Greece and Rome and all at the same time claim whiteness, because I'm sorry, I don't know if that makes sense. Or how do they do that?
I've been making my way very slowly through this book. Where do we go from here? And I think when I reached the fourth chapter, which is the dilemma of Negro Americans, I read the first line and I just sat with it for like half an hour. Because the first line, King says, the dilemma of white America is the source and cause of the dilemma of Negro America.
Say that again.
The dilemma of white America is the source and cause of the dilemma of Negro America. So he's not trying to say that sociology of Black people in the time that he's writing and today it's also true can be really done without having an understanding of what is going on in the psyche of white Americans.
Could I? And I don't know if I could just make a suggestion, because this idea of a sociology of white people. I mean, it's almost boggling the mind to think of doing it of a people who don't want to be in a group, certainly don't want to be studied as a group, outside of their personal whiteness.
Yeah.
Can we even study the history of white consciousness? And how do we do that?
I mean, I might not, I don't know how I'm going to sound when I say this, but when I heard that Tyler Robinson's father was the one who handed him in, I couldn't understand it, I felt, would my parents do that? And they wouldn't. I asked myself that, and they probably wouldn't. And I'm not saying don't hand over criminals. I'm not advocating for that at all. I'm just saying that I feel like it's almost an admittance of their failure as parents. That you find out and you don't try to talk.
In other words, he went to the police and told them where his son, rather than going to his son
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
I thought the story was that he did go to his son first.
Yeah.
And then convinced him that they shouldn't.
He was calling his son because he had given the son the rifle, and the FBI had released, I think, pictures of the rifle. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But he was calling his son and calling his family, saying, "Everyone, take a picture of your rifle and send it to me, so I can, make sure no one doesn't."
Picture of your rifle.
If you guys didn't, take a picture of your rifle and send it to me.
Maybe that's what his father was saying.
Take a picture.
Tyler Robinson was telling his trans partner, "My dad is calling me and I can't pick up because I'm hiding from the police. My gun is still out in the meadow. Can you go get it?"
No, but not to a partner.
What is it?
Really?
Yes, I love it.
Really?
The partner was like, "What's going on?" And then he couldn't, he was just like,
But the partner Tyler was like, "Oh crap! I left my rifle in the
That's
meadow." I do.
And
Yeah,
then
that's
he
my
was- he
granddad's
was kind
rifle.
of
My
the-
dad gave it to me.
Yeah.
He's really
Oh,
gonna.
shit.
and then he was venting to the partner the whole time, like, "I'm actually kind of anxious. I did everything right, but I left the rifle." And then the partner's like, "Where are you? Ah, this is happening."
And then the father, what I had read, I don't know if it's true or not, but the father knew it was his son, so the father had his sheriff friend. They had a family friend who was a police officer, and so they had the police officer come and meet, like a family powwow, where they were discussing the options, and then the sheriff was like, "Oh, you should turn yourself in," and Tyler was like, "Okay, I'll turn myself in."
Wow, an intervention, avoid intervention.
It's probably gonna get that.
Yeah, probably. All the outrage. I wanted to say just one other thing, which is a little unrelated, but I want to go back to the question of Pakistan at the UN. And I was thinking about this the whole time because Pakistan has had a very up and down relationship with the US for years, right? Because they were very friendly with the US. They were one of their most ardent non-NATO allies. They got a lot of aid and supplies after Indian independence. But then the US didn't support them in the war of 1971 with aid or supplies, and they lost that war.
What you talking about, the Bangladesh?
The
The US did support them. Yes.
Oh.
The US sent China on the side of Pakistan against Bangladesh.
Okay, I think I remember that they didn't send aid, so I'm not really entirely.
Yeah, we'll check that out.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
Maybe not on record.
Yeah, that's very possible. That's very possible. But I think after Imran Khan became such a populist, leader in Pakistan, and then with US support, he was put in jail.
Yeah, right.
And
Bangladesh was overthrown.
And then
The
Bangladesh
US
overthrown. Yeah, I think that it is. I feel like. Oh, and another thing that was really interesting is since the US have left Afghanistan in 2021, the dollar to Pakistani rupee has skyrocketed.
said it when the Pakistani.
Ever since the US left Afghanistan in 2021, $1 at that point was 150-60 Pakistani rupees, and now it's 282. $1 is 282 Pakistani rupees. So they've seen like a giant rate of inflation, like 80% inflation rates, and so I think that Pakistan is currently trying, maybe, I'm just guessing it, they're trying to repair relations with the US.
Now, whoever this guy was, did you see the speech at the General Assembly?
Not Pakistan.
Yeah, I looked at it, and it was, you say Trump was being non-diplomatic. This guy was second only to Trump. I mean, but there was nothing diplomatic. It was a provocation to India that, you tried to step to us and you got a bloody nose. This is the way he was talking.
Right.
And we shot down 6 of your planes. He was, did you see it, Samir? I mean, it was really outside of the bounds. It was like ridiculing India right there. And the Indian representative, who was a woman, she spoke and addressed it.
Right.
I forget all of what she said, but yeah.
This the country's been like since Islamification under General Zia Haq. It seems to be a thorn in India's side. The U.S. has manipulated it just the same way that the U.S. manipulated Ukraine, and they'll likely go down the same path. And my opinion is it's.
Oh, but the Indian representative said, it was a terrorist group into Kashmir and killing all these tourists.
Yeah.
And the Indian representative said that all of these terrorist groups are supported by the Pakistani government.
Trained by the CIA. Probably.
Trained by the CIA.
And I think the last thing that I want.
I've been critical of India on this matter. I thought it was an overreaction. You remember I said that. But now it seems maybe it wasn't an overreaction. And
just the last thing that I wanted to say is I thought it was really interesting when you were saying that Donald Trump's performance at the United Nations was a kind of denouncement of the anti-colonial and independence movements of the past. And I think you said Trump is out of touch with history and the world. I wanted to say, or I think that he is in touch with history and the world. He just chooses to not acknowledge it.
Well, what's the difference?
I mean, there's ignorance, and then there's willing, there's a kind of deception to it. Yeah, and I think that I would agree that he is stuck between being against the old NATO alliance and trying to establish this old white supremacist system, which the world has sort of moved on from. And I think I want to read out this small part that Baldwin wrote in Nobody Knows My Name, and this reminds me of Trump. The thing that most white people imagine they can salvage from the storm of life is really, in sum, their innocence. It was this commodity precisely which I had to get rid of at once, literally on pain of death. I am afraid that most of the white people I have ever known impressed me as being in the grip of a weird nostalgia, dreaming of a vanished state of security and order against which dream unfailingly and unconsciously they tested and very often lost their lives.
Could you read that last sentence again?
Yeah, so he said, I'm afraid that most of the white people I have ever known impressed me as being in the grip of a weird nostalgia, dreaming of a vanished state of security and order against which unfailingly and unconsciously they tested and very often lost their lives.
Right.
I don't quite, somehow I don't get the last part.
I'll send it.
they tested and lost their lives.
Yeah, he's trying to say that they're in the grips of this nostalgia and they're dreaming of a kind of past vanished state of security, and against which they constantly test their hypotheses and their their actions. They constantly do it, and they unfailingly do it, or they unconsciously do it, and they often lose their lives to it.
Okay, I'll read comments really fast. Todd, Nabila, Bambala, and Spark said, good morning. Nabila said, colonialism produced Frankenstein's monster, people who classify themselves as white. And then
Who said that?
Nabila.
Okay.
And then Abua Medisasi said, rest in peace, Asada Shakur. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our change. Nathan Reddy had a string of comments on distinguishing peasant cultures and civilization from whiteness itself as a modern invention, which we talked about. The people really did not like that Trump speech and agreed that the Netanyahu speech is very evil. There are a lot of Todd says Candace is reporting that the story about Tyler is entirely fabricated. And I think there are other people who are skeptical, especially like the text conversations and all the evidence coming out. Criticism of Zionism. There is an explanation about evangelicals. Lorenzo Betancourt says it's time to fight, stop debating, because if everyone debates and no one fights, then something. And then, Reverend Ike had said that I missed the comment. He said, God apologize for not being there. Just got hit by a real stomach uproar last night.
Got hit by what?
Real stomach uproar. And then Black Hassid had responded, parking's terrible around the church anyway, Reverend Miller. There's a festival on South Street.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a festival?
I think it's German. Right?
Maybe that's that's some weird.
M. Spark says, although Candace Owens does some good work, she strikes me as a Karen trapped in a beautiful African queen's body.
Candace, okay. She's a Karen trapped in a beautiful African queen.
Trump trapped.
New sociological categories. And then Will M says, if you watched a video of what they teach the kids, you know it's designed to teach them to be subservient to Zionists. That should be apparent from all the things they do and who surrounds Trump. It's painfully obvious, in fact. This is the first time I can remember that the USA has openly funded a Holocaust for Israel. 850 plus arms shipments for people who are now wholly living in tents or fighting from caves and tunnels. How could that possibly serve the interests of the people of the USA in any way? And as you can see, they're totally in control of the UN, as well as even the Arab countries. And then Will is also skeptical of the evidence coming out about Tyler Robinson and all of the hubbub and the process of the gun and turning himself in and all that. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining, and then we'll be back for free school next week. Last thing is that, sorry, we're planning a vigil for Azir Harris next. Azir Harris.
Oh, yes. Is that next Sunday?
It'll be next Sunday, October 5th at 5 p.m. at St. Mary's Church, which is an Episcopalian church, but it's on Locust Walk. So it's basically on Penn's campus. We had wanted to have it outside, like on campus. But the administration just did not want that to happen. So, but it'll be coming up on 3 months since Azir's passing. And so we really want to honor and commemorate his life. And it'll be like a short program from 5 to 6, but it'll also be a candlelight vigil. And so we just want to, come together and also support Troy and the family in this time. And so we have like a quarter card flyer, which I don't have today, but it would be great if people could come.
Thanks,
Okay, well, I know. Goodbye.